Hi guys, tonight we're going to explore the remarkable beginning of the American frontier during the years from 1803 to 1806, when a single decision quietly transformed the future of an entire continent. Imagine yourself standing beside a broad river at sunrise. Mist drifts across calm water while distant forests seem to stretch forever. The world ahead appears silent, mysterious, and almost impossible to measure. Somewhere beyond the horizon lie mountains no American citizen has yet crossed, rivers that remain unnamed on many maps, and countless lives already rooted in those distant landscapes. You're about to step into that world. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, I would love to know where you're listening from tonight. Leave your location and your local time in the comments below. It is always comforting to see listeners joining from every corner of the world. Now dim the lights for a moment. It feels as though the familiar world slips quietly behind you. The sounds of busy towns fade away until only birdsong, flowing water, and the gentle rustle of leaves remain. The American frontier is not yet the famous Wild West of later generations. It is something even larger and far less certain. It is an enormous unknown that exists mostly inside imagination, rumour, and scattered reports carried by traders and travellers. You begin your journey during the spring of 1803. Across the eastern United States, most people live surprisingly close to the Atlantic Ocean. Their farms, villages, and growing cities remain connected by roads that are muddy more often than smooth. Life is busy enough without wondering what lies thousands of miles beyond the Mississippi River, yet one man spends countless evenings thinking exactly about that question. President Thomas Jefferson believes knowledge is almost as valuable as land itself. He studies geography, reads reports from explorers, and fills his home with books describing distant places. He dreams of a nation that understands the continent rather than simply fearing its empty spaces. Modern historians often point to surviving correspondence showing Jefferson's lifelong fascination with science, geography, and natural history. Research discussed by scholars at Harvard University also emphasizes that his interest in Western exploration extended well beyond politics into genuine scientific curiosity. That combination of ambition and learning helps shape everything that follows. Still, historians continue debating how much Jefferson expected immediate settlement beyond the Mississippi. Some believe scientific discovery remained his primary goal, while others argue that long-term national expansion was already central to his thinking. The surviving evidence leaves room for thoughtful disagreement. As evening approaches, you picture candlelight flickering across Jefferson's desk. Sheets of paper cover polished wood. Maps lie unfolded beside carefully written letters. Some rivers end abruptly because no reliable information continues beyond them. Blank spaces still dominate the western half of North America. Those empty spaces capture imagination far more than certainty ever could. Outside the president's home, ordinary Americans rarely discuss distant mountains they will probably never see. Farmers worry about weather. Merchants negotiate prices. Families prepare meals. Children chase one another through dusty streets. Life feels comfortably familiar. Then everything changes with astonishing speed. Across the Atlantic Ocean, events beyond American control begin reshaping the continent. France, under Napoleon Bonaparte, possesses an enormous territory known as Louisiana. On paper, it stretches across an astonishing portion of North America. In reality, controlling such immense land proves far more difficult than drawing borders upon a map. Diplomats travel, letters cross oceans, negotiations unfold quietly behind closed doors. Few ordinary citizens expect dramatic news. Then word arrives. The United States has purchased the Louisiana Territory. The announcement spreads gradually rather than instantly. Newspapers carry reports from city to city. Travelers repeat astonishing stories during long journeys. Some listeners refuse to believe the news at first because the scale sounds almost impossible. You pause to consider what this means. The nation has not merely gained another county or another small province. It has doubled its claimed size almost overnight. Vast forests, winding rivers, sweeping plains, and unknown landscapes suddenly become part of America's future, even though almost nobody truly understands them. The excitement mixes naturally with uncertainty. How large is this land? Who already lives there? What animals roam its valleys? Where do its rivers lead? Can wagons even travel across it? Nobody possesses complete answers. According to research widely discussed by historians at Yale University, the Louisiana Purchase represented one of the most significant territorial expansions in American history because it fundamentally altered both national strategy and future economic possibilities. Yet those opportunities existed largely on paper until explorers could better understand the region itself. Your thoughts drift toward the Mississippi River. Its wide waters move steadily beneath changing skies. Flatboats float downstream carrying barrels, tools, animal skins, and hopeful merchants. River traffic becomes the quiet heartbeat connecting eastern settlements with distant frontier communities. The smell of wet wood rises from simple docks. Horse harnesses creak nearby. Fresh mud clings stubbornly to heavy boots. Nothing feels glamorous. Everything feels real. The frontier is built less by dramatic moments than by thousands of ordinary efforts repeated every single day. A trader tightens worn leather straps before loading supplies. A blacksmith wipes sweat from his forehead while shaping glowing iron. A mother folds rough blankets inside a wagon. A child wonders what waits beyond familiar hills. These small moments quietly support larger history. As daylight softens, your attention turns toward the western horizon. It appears endless. Forest meets sky without revealing what lies farther beyond. Every mile seems to invite another question instead of offering an answer. Perhaps that uncertainty explains why the frontier captures imagination so completely. People naturally dream about places they cannot yet see. Some dream of fertile farmland, others imagine profitable trade. Scientists hope to discover unfamiliar plants and animals. Adventurers simply long to know what exists beyond the next bend in the river. Not every dream survives reality. Yet dreams continue anyway. The first years after the Louisiana Purchase do not instantly create bustling frontier towns stretching toward distant mountains. Change arrives slowly, carried by determined individuals willing to exchange comfort for uncertainty. You begin sensing that this story is less about conquering wilderness than learning to understand it. The forests do not care about political agreements signed thousands of miles away. The rivers ignore national borders. The wind continues crossing open grasslands exactly as it always has. Long before American officials debate maps, Indigenous nations have already developed deep knowledge of these landscapes through countless generations. Their presence, traditions, diplomacy, and survival will become essential parts of every meaningful frontier story that follows. The evening air grows cooler. Wood smoke drifts gently from nearby cabins. Somewhere a horse exhales slowly after a long day's work. The quiet feels almost timeless. You realize that history rarely announces its greatest turning points with dramatic music or grand speeches. More often, change begins with careful signatures on paper, thoughtful conversations beside candlelight, and ordinary people waking the next morning without realizing their world has already become larger. You stand at the edge of that larger world now. The frontier has begun. Its greatest journeys still lie ahead. Its greatest mysteries remain untouched. And with every steady breath, every flowing river, and every mile of unexplored wilderness, you move one gentle step closer to understanding how the American West first opened itself to history. Your mind drifts forward as dawn slowly brightens the eastern sky. The morning air feels cool against your face, carrying the scent of damp earth after a night of gentle rain. Somewhere nearby, a rooster announces another ordinary day. Yet history often hides inside ordinary mornings. Few people stepping into the streets in 1803 fully understand that the nation around them has quietly entered a new age. The United States remains young, uncertain, and surprisingly fragile. Barely 2 decades have passed since independence. Roads remain rough. Communication moves only as fast as a horse can travel. News spreads slowly, changing a little each time another voice repeats it. You picture small towns stretching across the eastern states, Whitewashed churches stand beside simple taverns. Blacksmith shops ring with the steady rhythm of hammer striking iron. Children carry buckets from village wells, while merchants arrange goods outside wooden storefronts. Life feels comfortably familiar because almost everyone knows the boundaries of their world. Those boundaries are beginning to disappear. President Thomas Jefferson spends countless hours considering what this enormous new territory might become. His imagination reaches beyond politics. He believes a republic should be guided by knowledge as much as power. Every new river mapped, every unfamiliar plant collected, and every mountain described adds another piece to a much larger picture. You almost hear the scratch of a quill across thick paper. Letters pile neatly beside unfinished maps. Books remain open late into the evening. Jefferson reads carefully because he understands that ignorance can become far more dangerous than distance. Research discussed by historians at Princeton University has emphasized Jefferson's remarkable commitment to scientific inquiry during his presidency. His correspondence reveals genuine enthusiasm for astronomy, botany, geography, and natural history. He hopes exploration will expand human understanding, not merely political influence. Even so, historians still debate how practical Jefferson's Western vision truly was. Some scholars believe his plans reflected careful long-term strategy. Others suggest that many expectations underestimated the immense geographic and cultural complexity waiting beyond the Mississippi River. The surviving records support thoughtful discussion without offering complete certainty. For now, uncertainty itself becomes part of the story. You imagine Jefferson standing before one of his treasured maps. The paper appears worn from frequent study. Rivers twist across its surface before simply fading into blank space. Mountain ranges exist only as rumours copied from second-hand accounts. Some regions contain little more than guesses. Blank maps invite large dreams. They also invite costly mistakes. The president understands that ownership written upon paper means little unless someone actually knows the land. A nation cannot govern what it cannot describe. It cannot protect routes that remain invisible. It cannot negotiate wisely without understanding who already lives there. That final question matters deeply, long before American officials discuss expansion. Indigenous nations have developed thriving societies across the continent. Communities maintain trade networks stretching hundreds of miles. Oral traditions preserve knowledge of rivers, seasons, hunting grounds, and sacred places. Travelers move along established routes that outsiders barely recognize. The frontier is never empty. It simply appears unfamiliar to newcomers. You pause beside the imagined Mississippi River once more. Broad water reflects soft morning sunlight. Flatboats drift downstream loaded with flour, salted meat, iron tools, and barrels of whiskey. Boatmen guide their cargo with practiced movements learned through years of experience. River travel feels peaceful from a distance. Up close, every current demands attention. Hidden sandbars threaten heavy boats. Floating logs appear without warning. Changing water levels reshape familiar channels. Nature quietly reminds every traveler who truly controls the journey. The smell of wet leather rises from tightly packed cargo. Fresh rope creaks beneath steady tension. Cold river mist settles across rough wooden decks. These small details become part of everyday frontier life. Far away in Washington, government officials discuss possibilities using maps and reports. On the frontier itself, practical people think differently. Hunters wonder where game remains plentiful. Traders consider profitable routes. Farmers search for fertile soil. Soldiers worry about supply lines stretching farther into wilderness. Each person views the West through different eyes. Yet all of them share the same uncertainty. You begin noticing how slowly information travels. A conversation held today in the capital might not reach distant settlements for weeks. Rumours often arrive before facts. Stories grow larger each time another traveller repeats them around evening fires. Some accounts describe endless fertile valleys. Others warn of impossible deserts. One traveller claims rivers flow gently toward peaceful settlements. Another insists dangerous rapids block every path. Truth usually lies somewhere between extremes. Modern historians frequently compare these early reports with surviving journals and official records. Many dramatic frontier stories contain small kernels of truth wrapped inside understandable exaggeration. Human memory naturally reshapes unfamiliar experiences into unforgettable tales. That habit has never completely disappeared. As afternoon sunlight warms the countryside, you picture ordinary families discussing the western lands. A father studies a newspaper with careful attention. His wife wonders whether distant opportunities justify leaving familiar neighbours behind. Children imagine endless adventures without understanding the hardship such journeys require. Hope fills the room, so does caution. The frontier promises possibility. It also demands sacrifice. You watch smoke curl gently upward from a stone chimney, while simple soup simmers above glowing coals. Wooden bowls rest upon a sturdy table worn smooth by years of daily use. The meal is modest, yet comforting after honest work. History is built around tables like this. Decisions made inside quiet homes eventually shape entire nations. Some families remain where generations have already settled. Others begin considering a future farther west. Neither choice feels easy. Beyond these conversations, Jefferson quietly reaches another conclusion. Exploration cannot depend upon scattered rumours forever. Reliable knowledge requires disciplined observation. Skilled individuals must travel across the continent, record what they see, measure distances carefully, and return with trustworthy information. The idea seems simple. Its execution will prove extraordinary. You sense preparation beginning long before boots touch wilderness trails. Supplies must be gathered, equipment must be tested. Scientific instruments require careful handling. Men capable of enduring hardship must be chosen with unusual care because failure hundreds of miles from civilization could quickly become fatal. Yet the coming expedition will seek more than survival. It will seek understanding. Every unfamiliar plant may hold scientific value. Every river bend may reshape future maps. Every peaceful meeting may strengthen future diplomacy. Every careful observation may reduce dangerous uncertainty. The frontier gradually transforms from mysterious legend into something patiently knowable. Evening arrives once again. Golden light settles across fields ready for harvest. Horses lower their heads beside quiet fences. Crickets begin their steady chorus as warm daylight slowly fades into cool twilight. You breathe deeply. Wood smoke mingles with the scent of fresh hay. Somewhere a distant church bell echoes softly across the countryside. The familiar eastern world remains calm tonight. Beyond the horizon, however, immense landscapes wait in patient silence. Forests stretch beyond imagination. Rivers continue flowing toward unknown destinations. Mountain ranges remain hidden behind distance and mystery. Jefferson understands that curiosity alone will not reveal them. Someone must go. Someone must observe carefully. Someone must return as darkness settles gently over the young republic. You realize the American frontier is not opening through dramatic conquest alone. It begins with questions asked honestly, knowledge pursued patiently, and the quiet determination to replace speculation with understanding. Soon, those questions will begin moving westward one careful mile at a time. The first light of morning spreads slowly across the countryside, turning fields silver with dew before warming them into shades of green and gold. You stand quietly beside a modest military post where activity has already begun. Horses stamp their hooves against packed earth. Leather saddles creak as they are lifted into place, somewhere nearby. The sharp scent of fresh pine mixes with wood smoke rising from breakfast fires. The frontier still waits beyond the horizon, but now people are preparing to meet it, for weeks. Careful planning has unfolded with remarkable patience. The journey ahead will demand far more than courage. It will require discipline, knowledge, organization, and an acceptance that every forgotten tool could become tomorrow's greatest problem. Nothing is left entirely to chance. Your attention settles upon two men whose partnership will soon become one of the most famous in American history. Meriwether Lewis carries himself with quiet seriousness. His expression suggests someone who thinks before speaking. William Clark appears practical, steady, and experienced in leading men through difficult country. Their personalities differ. Their purpose is shared. President Jefferson chooses Lewis because he trusts both his judgment and his character. Lewis recognizing the scale of the challenge, asks William Clark to join him as an equal leader despite official military rank placing Lewis above him from the beginning. Cooperation matters more than pride. Modern historians have often pointed to surviving journals and correspondence showing that the partnership between Lewis and Clark succeeded largely because each man's strengths balanced the other's weaknesses. Research discussed by scholars at the University of Virginia has emphasized how unusual and effective this shared leadership became during the expedition. Even today, historians continue discussing exactly how responsibilities were divided throughout the journey. Some argue Lewis remained the principal scientific observer, while others emphasize Clark's extraordinary skills in mapping, logistics, and daily leadership. The surviving journals suggest that both contributions proved indispensable. You watch preparations continue around them. Barrels are inspected, rifles receive careful cleaning, blankets are folded tightly, cooking kettles are stacked inside sturdy wagons. No item appears glamorous. Every item matters. A missing needle could mean torn clothing remains unrepaired. A damaged axe could delay camp construction. Spoiled food might threaten everyone's strength. The frontier rarely punishes dramatic mistakes first. It punishes small ones. The air smells faintly of wet canvas drying beneath the morning sun. Thick coils of rope lie beside wooden crates filled with supplies. Iron tools glimmer softly after being rubbed clean of rust. Men kneel beside open chests, counting equipment again and again. You notice the scientific instruments receiving especially careful attention. Compasses, sextants, chronometers, writing materials, specimen containers. These delicate objects may seem strangely out of place beside muskets and hunting knives. Yet they represent one of the expedition's greatest purposes. The journey is meant not simply to travel but to observe. Every measurement will matter. Every journal entry may become history. Jefferson has instructed Lewis to collect information about geography, wildlife, weather, soil, rivers, and the many native nations living throughout the region. The expedition is expected to return with knowledge as valuable as any treasure. For a moment, you imagine opening one of the leather-bound notebooks waiting to accompany the explorers. Its pages remain perfectly blank. Not for long. Soon those pages will describe unfamiliar flowers blooming beside distant streams. They will record the movements of strange animals never before carefully documented by American observers. They will preserve conversations, hardships, discoveries, and ordinary moments that otherwise might disappear forever. Blank paper carries quiet promise. Nearby, soldiers begin practicing with their firearms. The sharp crack of musket fire briefly interrupts the peaceful morning before fading once more into birdsong. Accuracy matters because hunting will supply much of the expedition's food. Ammunition must never be wasted carelessly. Powder remains dry, weapons stay clean. Discipline becomes routine. You notice that physical strength alone cannot guarantee success. Many frontier legends celebrate fearless adventurers charging into danger without hesitation. Reality looks very different. Successful explorers prepare endlessly. They repair equipment before it breaks. They organize supplies before confusion begins. They think several days ahead. The frontier rewards patience far more often than reckless bravery. Research highlighted by historians at Stanford University has shown that detailed logistical preparation played a critical role in the expedition's remarkable survival. The journals reveal constant attention to food supplies, equipment maintenance, navigation, and daily routines rather than dramatic heroics alone. The sun climbs higher, warmth spreads across the camp. Sweat gathers beneath heavy wool uniforms despite the pleasant weather. Thick clothing protects against cold mornings and rough vegetation. Yet it quickly becomes uncomfortable during afternoon labour. A young soldier removes his hat for only a moment before wiping his forehead. Another quietly repairs a torn strap using thick linen thread. Someone laughs softly after dropping a wooden spoon into the dust. Small moments continue. History keeps moving. Your thoughts drift toward the families left behind. Mothers embrace sons before departure. Friends exchange firm handshakes that linger a little longer than usual. Some conversations become surprisingly quiet because nobody knows exactly when, or even if, these men will return. Goodbyes often contain hope. They also carry hidden fear. The expedition expects to travel into lands where maps offer little guidance. Illness, accidents, weather, and unfamiliar terrain present constant risks. Every farewell acknowledges uncertainty without speaking it aloud. You hear wagon wheels rolling slowly across packed earth. Oxen pull heavy loads with patient determination. Leather harnesses groan under steady tension. Dust rises behind each careful movement. The journey has not officially begun, yet already it demands effort. Lewis continues reviewing lists. Clark quietly studies river routes. Both understand that leadership begins long before the first mile. Nearby, craftsmen finish repairing boats designed for river travel. Thick wooden planks fit tightly together. Tar seals every seam against leaking water. Oars rest neatly inside each vessel, waiting for the current that will soon carry them westward. You run your hand across smooth timber still smelling faintly of fresh pitch. The boats appear sturdy. They must be. Thousands of miles of river await them. As afternoon gradually softens toward evening, the camp settles into calmer rhythms. Dinner cooks over open fires. Salted pork, beans, and coarse bread provide simple nourishment after another busy day. Nobody complains about the plain meal, because everyone understands comfort will become increasingly rare once the wilderness surrounds them. The aroma of wood smoke fills the cooling air. Tin cups pass quietly from hand to hand. Conversation becomes thoughtful. Some men discuss rivers they hope to see. Others wonder about towering mountains described only through distant reports. A few simply stare into the flames. Silence feels easier. You begin recognizing something remarkable. The expedition is preparing not merely to travel across geography, but to cross the boundary between the known and the unknown. Behind them lies a nation growing steadily more confident. Ahead stretches a continent still holding countless unanswered questions. The contrast feels enormous. Night finally settles across the camp. Stars appear one by one above the darkening sky, somewhere beyond the trees. An owl calls into the quiet. Horses breathe slowly as they rest before tomorrow's work. You look toward the western darkness where no roads yet lead. The preparations are nearly complete. Soon the waiting will end. Soon the great rivers will begin carrying these determined travelers toward a world that very few Americans have ever imagined with any accuracy. And with every carefully packed crate, every sharpened blade, every written instruction, and every steady heartbeat, the American frontier moves one silent step closer to revealing itself. Your thoughts move gently forward until the final morning of waiting quietly becomes the first morning of a departure. Before sunrise, the camp stirs with careful purpose rather than excitement. No one shouts. No one rushes. Experienced travelers know that long journeys begin best with calm hands and clear minds. A thin layer of mist hangs above the nearby river. The water appears almost perfectly still. Only the slow splash of an early fish disturbs its glass-like surface. The air carries the cool scent of wet grass mixed with fading campfire smoke. Dew clings to boots as men walk between neatly stacked supplies one final time. Every crate is checked again. Every rope is tightened once more. Every boat receives another careful inspection. There is comfort in routine. You notice Lewis quietly reviewing his notebook before carefully placing it inside an oilskin covering. Clark walks slowly along the shoreline, studying the boats with the practiced eye of a man who knows that rivers forgive very few mistakes. Neither man appears dramatic. Their confidence comes from preparation rather than bold speeches. Nearby, breakfast is simple: fresh bread, salted meat, hot coffee. The warm smell of roasted beans drifts gently across the camp while tin cups pass from hand to hand. Few conversations last very long. Most men seem occupied by their own thoughts. Some think about the families they have left behind. Others wonder what the coming weeks will reveal. Everyone understands that the familiar world is about to disappear behind them. As the sun finally rises above distant trees, golden light spreads across the Missouri River. The broad water glows softly, reflecting both sky and forest. It seems peaceful enough. Appearances can deceive. The Missouri is unlike many eastern rivers. Its current shifts constantly. Mud clouds the water, hiding submerged logs and changing sandbars. The river twists through wide valleys with little concern for human plans. It is beautiful. It is demanding. Modern historians frequently describe the Missouri as both the highway and the obstacle of Western exploration. Research discussed by scholars at the University of Chicago emphasizes that without the river, large-scale exploration would have been nearly impossible, yet traveling against its powerful current required extraordinary effort and discipline. Historians still debate whether the Missouri presented the expedition's greatest natural challenge before reaching the Rocky Mountains. Some argue the endless struggle against the river exhausted the men more than any single dramatic event. Others believe later mountain crossings proved even more demanding. The journals support both perspectives depending upon the season and location. For now, you simply watch the boats begin moving. Long poles press against the riverbed. Strong arms pull steadily at heavy oars. The current immediately reminds everyone that it has no intention of helping. Progress comes slowly, sometimes painfully slowly. You stand near the bow of one boat as muddy water slips quietly past. The riverbank glides by at a patient pace. Familiar settlements remain visible for a little while, their wooden buildings growing smaller with every passing minute. Soon they disappear entirely. The feeling surprises you. There is no great farewell ceremony. No cheering crowds, only distance. The frontier often begins not with triumph, but with quiet separation from everything familiar. The sounds change as well. Church bells no longer echo across villages. Wagon wheels fade into memory. Instead, you hear water pushing against wooden hulls, birds calling from tall cottonwood trees, and the rhythmic splash of oars rising and falling together. The expedition settles into its first true working rhythm. Push, step, lift, pull, repeat. Hour after hour, the labour appears almost hypnotic. Strong men lean against long poles planted firmly into the riverbed, walking from the bow toward the stern before lifting the poles and beginning again. Others haul ropes from the shoreline where the current becomes especially difficult. Nothing about this work feels glorious. Everything about it feels necessary. Your hands begin to imagine the rough texture of weathered wood. Even through sturdy gloves, splinters threaten tired fingers. Wet rope leaves faint marks across hard-working palms. Muscles ache long before the day reaches its end. This is the real frontier. Not endless adventure, endless effort. The morning gradually gives way to afternoon. Sunlight grows warmer, reflecting brightly from the muddy river. Insects hover above calm stretches of water. Occasionally a turtle slips from a fallen log with a quiet splash. Life continues all around you. White-tailed deer appear cautiously along the shoreline before vanishing into dense forest. Great blue herons stand perfectly still in shallow water, waiting with remarkable patience for fish. Bald eagles circle high above the river valley. Nature watches the travellers as carefully as they watch nature. Lewis frequently pauses to record observations inside his journal. A flowering plant catches his attention. An unfamiliar bird receives careful description. Changes in the river's direction are noted with surprising precision. Nothing seems too small. Every detail matters. Research from historians associated with Columbia University has emphasized that the expedition's scientific observations dramatically expanded American understanding of Western ecosystems. Their journals combined practical travel records with careful natural history, creating a foundation that later researchers continued building upon. As the afternoon wears on, clouds slowly gather overhead. The bright blue sky softens beneath grey layers moving steadily from the west. A cool breeze replaces the earlier warmth. The first drops arrive quietly. Rain, not heavy enough to stop, just enough to remind everyone that comfort has become a luxury. Canvas coverings are adjusted over supplies, hats are pulled lower across tired faces, water darkens wool clothing until it feels heavier with every passing minute. Nobody complains. The work continues. Rain eventually passes as gently as it arrived. The scent of fresh earth fills the air. Leaves shimmer with tiny droplets reflecting the returning sunlight. The river appears almost renewed beneath the clearing sky. Even difficult moments become strangely beautiful out here. Late in the day, Clark orders the boats toward a suitable campsite along a gently rising bank. The landing itself demands careful coordination. Heavy craft cannot simply drift wherever they please. Strong hands guide each vessel against the current before securing thick ropes around sturdy trees. Camp begins taking shape almost automatically. Some men gather firewood, others pitch tents, several unload cooking equipment. Everyone understands the routine already. Soon smoke rises through the evening air once more. A simple stew simmers slowly inside an iron pot. The smell of onions, dried meat, and herbs spreads across the quiet camp. After hours of physical labour, even modest food tastes deeply satisfying. You sit beside the fire. Wet boots dry gradually. Cold fingers regain warmth. Someone quietly mends a torn sleeve while another sharpens a hunting knife with slow, careful strokes. Conversation returns, softly. One man jokes about the stubborn river. Another wonders how much farther it truly stretches. Nobody knows. Darkness settles gently across the valley. Stars begin appearing through breaks in the clouds. Frogs call from nearby wetlands while the river continues its endless movement beside the sleeping camp. You listen carefully. The sounds of civilization have vanished completely now. There are only water, wind, insects, distant animal calls, and the steady breathing of tired companions resting after an honest day's work. You realize that the expedition has crossed an invisible line. Looking back is no longer practical. Only forward remains, with each mile carried against the Missouri's relentless current. The familiar world grows smaller behind you while the immense frontier quietly opens ahead, inviting patience, endurance, and the courage to keep moving even when the destination still exists only on unfinished maps. Your breathing settles into the steady rhythm of the river. Morning arrives without hurry, unfolding softly beneath a pale sky that gradually brightens above the endless valley. Cool air drifts across the water, carrying the earthy scent of wet clay mixed with fresh willow leaves. Somewhere in the distance, geese call to one another before disappearing into the growing light. The camp awakens quietly. A few glowing embers still hide beneath yesterday's ashes. One of the men kneels to stir them gently, adding dry twigs until small flames return. Soon a kettle hangs above the fire, and the familiar smell of hot coffee begins spreading through the cool morning air. Simple comforts matter more each day. You notice how quickly routines have become second nature. Blankets are folded without discussion. Cooking pots are cleaned before breakfast is finished. Equipment is inspected almost automatically. The expedition is slowly becoming less like a collection of individuals and more like a single working community. Everyone depends upon everyone else. No task is too small. A loose strap repaired today may prevent disaster tomorrow. A sharpened knife may prepare the evening meal. A carefully packed journal may preserve discoveries that future generations will study. As the boats return to the river, you begin noticing the Missouri with new eyes. Yesterday it seemed broad and impressive. Today it feels alive. The muddy current twists unpredictably around hidden obstacles. Fallen trees lean into the water as though reaching for passing boats. Small islands appear unexpectedly before vanishing again around distant bends. The river never repeats itself. Each mile introduces something new. The men quickly learn that travelling upstream demands constant cooperation. Long poles press against the riverbed, while others pull heavily upon the oars. Sometimes the current becomes so powerful that several men climb onto the shoreline, fastening thick ropes around their shoulders before slowly dragging the boats forward, step by exhausting step. Their boots sink into wet mud. Their shoulders strain beneath heavy ropes. Their breathing grows louder than conversation. Progress is measured in determination rather than speed. Modern historians have often observed that travelling upstream on the Missouri required extraordinary physical endurance. Research discussed by scholars at the University of California has emphasized that the expedition frequently advanced only a few miles during difficult days despite working from sunrise until evening. Even today, historians continue discussing exactly how demanding these river conditions became during different seasons. Some believe unusually favorable weather eased portions of the journey, while others argue that surviving journals may actually understate the daily exhaustion, because such hardships gradually became routine for the explorers themselves. You imagine yourself gripping one of the heavy poles, The smooth wood feels cool at first, but gradually becomes slippery beneath tired hands. Every push against the riverbed requires balance as well as strength. One careless movement could send you tumbling into the fast-moving water. There is little room for distraction. The Missouri demands full attention. Hours pass beneath a sky that grows steadily brighter. Sunlight sparkles upon the water, though the river remains far from clear. Thick sediment gives it a rich brown colour, carrying soil gathered from hundreds of distant streams. Every current tells part of a larger story unfolding across the continent. Lewis frequently pauses to observe the landscape. He notices changes in vegetation that might seem insignificant to casual travellers. Cottonwood forests become denser along certain stretches. Prairie grasses begin appearing beyond the riverbanks. Wildflowers add unexpected patches of blue, yellow, and white beside the muddy shoreline. The expedition records everything. Nothing is dismissed as unimportant. Scientific curiosity walks beside practical necessity every single day. Research highlighted by historians at Stanford University notes that the careful botanical observations made during these early stages significantly expanded scientific knowledge of Western North American plant life. Many specimens collected during the expedition later became valuable references for naturalists studying the continent. The landscape itself begins changing almost imperceptibly. Dense eastern forests slowly give way to more open country. Tall grasses ripple beneath the breeze like waves crossing a quiet sea. The horizon stretches farther than before, creating a growing sense of space unlike anything experienced in the crowded eastern states. You pause for a moment. The silence feels different here. Not empty, simply larger. Every sound travels farther across the open land. The distant call of a hawk seems suspended in the clear air. Wind moves gently through tall grass with a soft whisper that never quite stops. Occasionally the splash of a beaver's tail echoes across the water before calm returns once more. Nature speaks constantly, only quietly, by midday. The expedition stops briefly along a shaded bank where enormous cottonwood trees provide welcome relief from the strengthening sun. Lunch remains simple. Dried meat, hard bread, fresh river water carefully collected. No elaborate feast waits in the wilderness, yet after hours of relentless labour, even plain food becomes deeply satisfying. One young soldier quietly removes his boots, rubbing sore feet before carefully putting them back on. Another mends a torn shirt with patient stitches while listening to Clark discuss the afternoon's route. These intimate moments rarely appear in grand paintings of exploration, yet they define real journeys. History is often carried forward by blistered feet, tired hands, and ordinary perseverance. As the afternoon continues, you notice increasing signs of wildlife. White pelicans drift gracefully upon calm stretches of water. Beavers leave fresh marks upon tree trunks near the riverbank. A herd of deer pauses briefly to watch the boats before disappearing into tall grass. Then everyone grows unusually quiet. Large tracks appear beside the muddy shoreline. Fresh tracks, massive ones. Lewis kneels carefully beside them, examining each impression with thoughtful attention. The tracks almost certainly belong to bison, animals that many Eastern Americans have heard about but few have ever seen. The possibility fills the camp with quiet excitement. Somewhere ahead, vast herds may still roam these grasslands. The frontier continues revealing itself one careful discovery at a time. Late in the afternoon, clouds gather once again, though this time they bring only welcome shade rather than rain. The cooler air lifts tired spirits. Conversation becomes livelier as the boats round another broad bend in the river. Clark studies the shoreline. Lewis updates his journal. The crew continues working with practiced rhythm, without realizing it. They have already begun changing. The awkward uncertainty of departure has faded. Confidence grows slowly through repetition rather than sudden inspiration. Camp is established once more as evening approaches. The familiar routine unfolds with remarkable efficiency. Fires are lit. Cooking begins. Wet clothing is hung to dry upon carefully cut poles. Rifles receive cleaning before darkness falls. The smell of wood smoke mingles with roasting meat. Crickets begin their evening chorus. The river glows softly beneath the setting sun. You sit quietly beside the fire, watching sparks drift upward into the darkening sky. Beyond the circle of warm light stretches a continent that still holds countless mysteries. Yet those mysteries feel slightly less distant tonight than they did yesterday. Each mile matters. Each careful observation matters. Each ordinary day pushes the boundary between the known and the unknown a little farther west. The expedition is no longer simply leaving civilization behind. It is patiently building a bridge between two worlds, one measured in familiar certainty and the other waiting beyond every winding curve of the mighty Missouri River. Your thoughts continue drifting westward with the slow current of another peaceful morning. The river seems almost gentle today, its broad surface reflecting pale clouds that stretch across the endless sky. Thin ribbons of mist linger above the water before gradually dissolving beneath the warmth of the rising sun. The day begins quietly. A meadowlark sings from a nearby cottonwood. The smell of damp grass mixes with cooling ashes from the breakfast fire. Someone folds a wool blanket with practiced hands while another quietly tightens the straps around a supply barrel. The expedition has settled into a dependable rhythm. Every sunrise brings familiar responsibilities, yet every bend in the river introduces something entirely new. That balance between routine and discovery keeps both mind and body constantly engaged. This morning, however, something different awaits. The boats round a broad curve where smoke rises gently above the distant trees. At first it appears almost like morning fog, but Lewis studies it carefully before lowering his telescope. People live ahead. The realization carries no surprise. Long before American explorers entered these valleys, countless indigenous nations had already built thriving communities throughout the continent. Villages stood beside rivers. Trade routes connected distant peoples. Generations had learned the changing seasons, the movements of wildlife, and the rhythms of the land with remarkable precision. The frontier is not empty wilderness. It is home. As the expedition continues forward, everyone becomes noticeably more attentive. Weapons remain close, though not aggressively displayed. Lewis and Clark both understand that first impressions may shape every meeting that follows. Respect matters. Patience matters. Listening matters even more. Research discussed by historians at Yale University emphasizes that diplomacy became one of the expedition's most important responsibilities. Jefferson instructed Lewis to establish peaceful relations whenever possible, recognizing that successful exploration depended heavily upon cooperation rather than confrontation. Historians still debate how consistently these diplomatic goals matched events on the ground. Some scholars argue that genuine curiosity often shaped early encounters. Others believe expanding national interests inevitably influenced every conversation. The surviving journals reveal moments of sincere respect, alongside the growing realities of American expansion. You feel the boats slowing as they approach the shoreline. Voices drift softly across the water. Children watch from a safe distance. Several experienced hunters stand calmly nearby, carefully observing the unfamiliar visitors. No one rushes forward. Everyone studies everyone else. The silence lasts only a few moments, yet it feels much longer. Then careful gestures replace uncertainty. Lewis steps ashore without haste. Clark follows nearby. Gifts prepared long before the expedition departed are brought forward. Bright cloth, small metal tools, mirrors, and other trade goods are offered as signs of peaceful intent. Conversations begin slowly. Language presents an obvious challenge. Few people share the same words, yet human beings possess many ways of communicating beyond speech. Gentle expressions, open hands, respectful posture, and patient observation all help reduce misunderstanding. You watch faces gradually relax. Curiosity begins replacing caution. One elderly man points toward the river before tracing its winding course with a weathered finger across the air. A younger hunter gestures toward distant hills where game animals often travel during certain seasons. Knowledge begins flowing in both directions. The expedition offers manufactured goods unfamiliar to many local communities. The indigenous people offer something far more valuable: experience. No map carried from the east contains the understanding preserved within these communities. They know where rivers flood during spring. They recognize edible plants hidden among countless others. They understand weather patterns, animal migrations, and safe crossing places that outsiders could easily overlook. The exchange feels remarkably practical. It also feels deeply human. Modern research from historians associated with the University of Chicago has highlighted how dependent the expedition became upon indigenous knowledge throughout much of its journey. Local guidance frequently proved more reliable than distant assumptions formed thousands of miles away. You notice the clothing worn by those gathered beside the river. Carefully prepared animal hides move naturally with each step. Decorative beadwork catches sunlight in subtle flashes of colour. Moccasins leave almost silent footprints across soft earth. Nothing appears accidental. Every detail serves both beauty and purpose. Nearby, women prepare food over open fires while children chase one another through the village with cheerful laughter. Dogs wander comfortably between shelters, occasionally stopping to inspect the unusual visitors before losing interest. Life continues. The arrival of strangers becomes only one part of the day's activities. The smell of roasting fish drifts gently through the warm afternoon air. Fresh herbs add earthy fragrance to the cooking fires. Somewhere nearby, hides stretched upon wooden frames dry beneath the sun after careful preparation. These ordinary scenes remind you that history is rarely composed only of famous leaders and celebrated expeditions. Families still prepare meals. Parents still teach children. Neighbours still help one another. The great movements of history unfold alongside everyday life. Lewis quietly records careful observations inside his journal. He notes customs, clothing, village layouts, agricultural practices, and the surrounding landscape. Clark sketches rough maps showing river channels and nearby landmarks. Neither man believes they are seeing everything. Both understand they are seeing only a beginning. Accounts differ even among later historians regarding the size and diversity of the communities encountered during these early years. Some descriptions emphasize population estimates, while others focus more upon cultural practices or regional relationships. No single record captures every detail completely. That uncertainty deserves respect. As afternoon light softens, trade begins in earnest. Metal knives attract immediate interest because of their usefulness. In return, the expedition receives practical information about waterways farther west. Directions are given through gestures, remembered landmarks, and patient explanation. The conversations move slowly, yet they accomplish much. Trust cannot be hurried. You reflect upon how easily later generations sometimes imagine the frontier as a place defined only by conflict. Certainly difficult years lie ahead in American history, yet during these early encounters, cooperation often determines whether exploration succeeds at all. Without local knowledge, survival itself becomes uncertain. As evening approaches, the expedition prepares to continue its journey. Farewells remain simple but sincere. Small gifts are exchanged. Hands are raised in quiet acknowledgement. The boats drift gradually back into the current while figures upon the shoreline grow smaller beneath the golden light of sunset. The river carries you onward. The village slowly disappears behind the trees. Its lessons remain. Night arrives beneath a sky filled with brilliant stars. Camp is established beside another quiet stretch of water. The familiar routines return almost effortlessly. Fires crackle softly. Supper cooks inside blackened kettles. Journals receive another day's careful entries before being protected from the evening dew. You sit beside the fading fire. The warmth reaches tired hands. A cool breeze stirs nearby grasses. Somewhere across the dark river, a wolf calls into the vast silence before another answers from far away. The frontier feels larger tonight. Not because the land has grown, because your understanding has. You realize that the American West cannot be understood through rivers and mountains alone. It is also shaped by the people who have long called these places home, whose knowledge quietly guides newcomers through landscapes that remain mysterious only to those seeing them for the first time. The expedition continues west, carrying maps, journals, supplies, and growing humility into a world that reveals its greatest lessons not through conquest, but through careful observation and respectful exchange. For a while it feels as though the river itself has accepted your presence. The current still resists every mile, Yet the steady rhythm of travel has become almost comforting. Morning follows morning with quiet consistency. The sky brightens. Fires are stirred back to life. Coffee warms tired hands. Boats return to the water before the first heat of the day settles across the valley. The expedition is no longer merely travelling, it is learning how to live. You begin noticing that camp life has developed its own quiet order. Every person understands where to stand, what to carry, and when to begin each task. There are very few spoken instructions now because repetition has turned labour into habit. That habit brings confidence. The first responsibility each morning belongs to the fire. Even before the sun fully rises, glowing coals hidden beneath grey ash are gently uncovered. Dry twigs crackle softly before larger pieces of wood catch flame. Thin ribbons of smoke drift upward through the cool morning air. The smell of burning oak feels strangely reassuring. Nearby, someone fills an iron kettle from the river while another slices salted pork into thick pieces for breakfast. Hard bread is passed from hand to hand. There is little variety, but no one expects luxury. Food is fuel. That simple truth shapes every meal. Research discussed by historians at the University of Pennsylvania has shown that maintaining regular daily routines proved essential for long expeditions. Consistent schedules reduce confusion, preserve supplies, and strengthen cooperation among the men during months of uncertainty. Historians still debate exactly how much personal freedom existed within these daily routines. Some interpret the journals as evidence of strict military discipline. Others suggest that practical flexibility often replaced formal regulations whenever changing conditions demanded quick adaptation. The surviving records reveal elements of both. As breakfast ends, each person returns to familiar responsibilities. One man carefully oils rifle mechanisms to prevent rust from damp river air. Another repairs a cracked paddle using fresh wood and rawhide bindings. Lewis organizes botanical specimens collected the previous afternoon, while Clark studies the next stretch of river with patient concentration. Every task appears ordinary. Together, they keep the expedition alive. You notice clothing receiving almost constant attention. Wool shirts are brushed free of dirt. Torn sleeves are stitched before small holes become larger ones. Wet moccasins are dried carefully beside the fire, but never placed too close to the flames. A ruined pair of shoes could become a serious problem hundreds of miles from the nearest settlement. Nothing is wasted. Not thread, not leather, not time. The boats push away from shore once again. The familiar rhythm returns almost immediately. Oars dip into muddy water. Long poles press firmly against the riverbed. The crew works together with quiet efficiency, born from repetition rather than excitement. You feel the muscles in your shoulders settling into the steady labour. The river offers no shortcuts, only persistence. By late morning the sun climbs higher, warming the valley until jackets are loosened and sleeves rolled upward. Sweat gathers beneath broad-brimmed hats. The smell of warm leather rises from belts and saddles drying after another cool dawn. A dragonfly skims across the river. A turtle slips silently into deeper water. The wilderness notices every movement. Around midday, the expedition reaches a shaded riverbank where towering cottonwood trees provide welcome relief. Lunch remains simple, yet the pause itself becomes valuable. Boots are removed for a few precious minutes. Sore feet are examined. Blisters receive careful treatment before becoming serious injuries. One man quietly massages an aching shoulder. Another sharpens a cooking knife against a smooth whetstone. Someone laughs after discovering a squirrel trying to steal a forgotten piece of bread. Even in difficult places, ordinary humour survives. These moments of quiet companionship gradually transform strangers into trusted companions. Long journeys reveal character more honestly than comfortable homes ever can. Patience becomes visible. Generosity becomes memorable. So does selfishness. Fortunately, cooperation grows stronger with every passing week. Lewis and Clark understand that leadership extends beyond giving orders. They regularly work beside the men, sharing many of the same hardships. They haul equipment, inspect boats, and endure rain, insects, and fatigue without asking others to face burdens they avoid themselves. That example matters. Respect grows naturally when shared effort replaces distant authority. Modern historians frequently note that the expedition maintained unusually strong internal cohesion compared with many similar ventures of the era. Research highlighted by scholars at Duke University suggests that mutual respect, careful planning, and consistent leadership significantly contributed to the remarkably low level of internal conflict recorded in surviving journals. The afternoon brings another challenge. Dark clouds gather unexpectedly above the western horizon. Wind begins sweeping across the river, sending small waves against the boats. The calm water you enjoyed earlier quickly changes its mood. Canvas coverings are secured. Loose equipment is tied down. Every movement becomes deliberate. The first gust arrives with surprising force, rattling branches overhead and scattering dry leaves across the river's surface. Rain follows only moments later. Heavy rain, cold rain. The drops drum loudly against stretched canvas while the crew guides the boats toward the nearest safe shoreline. Everyone moves quickly, though never carelessly. Experience has already taught them that panic solves nothing. Within minutes, the expedition reaches shelter beneath a grove of sturdy trees. Temporary coverings are stretched between trunks while supplies receive additional protection from the downpour. The storm continues. Water runs through the grass in narrow streams. Thunder rolls somewhere beyond distant hills. Lightning briefly illuminates the grey afternoon sky. Then, almost as suddenly as it arrived, the storm begins drifting away. Silence slowly returns. Rainwater drips steadily from branches above. The smell of soaked earth fills the cooling air. Sunlight breaks through scattered clouds, creating shimmering reflections across countless droplets clinging to every leaf. The entire valley seems freshly washed. You breathe deeply. The world feels clean again. The expedition resumes its journey, though the pace remains slower while equipment dries beneath the returning sunshine. Wet clothing clings heavily to tired bodies. Boots squish softly with every step taken along the shoreline. Nobody complains. There is no audience here, only the river. As evening approaches, camp is established beside a gently sloping meadow overlooking the Missouri. Wildflowers sway beneath the fading light while countless insects hum quietly among tall grasses. Dinner consists of roasted fish caught earlier in the day along with dried corn and fresh herbs gathered nearby. The aroma feels wonderfully comforting after the long wet afternoon. Conversation turns reflective. One man speaks about home, another wonders what mountains truly look like. Someone quietly predicts they will see them before winter arrives. No one can know for certain. Darkness settles gently over the camp. Firelight dances across weathered faces while journals receive another evening's careful entries beyond the circle of light. The frontier stretches silently beneath an endless sky filled with brilliant stars. You realize that great expeditions are sustained not by extraordinary moments alone, but by thousands of ordinary routines faithfully repeated. Meals shared together, clothes repaired before dawn, boots dried beside the fire, quiet laughter after difficult days. These simple acts become the invisible foundation beneath every remarkable achievement. And as the Missouri continues carrying the expedition deeper into the American frontier, you begin understanding that survival itself is built one peaceful evening, one careful morning, and one dependable companion at a time. Your thoughts flow onward with the river as another calm morning unfolds across the wide Missouri Valley. A soft golden light spreads over the water before touching the tops of cottonwood trees. The air feels crisp enough that every deep breath carries the clean scent of damp leaves and cool earth. The expedition rises before the sun fully clears the horizon. Boots are pulled on, blankets are rolled, cooking fires come alive once more. You have grown so accustomed to these quiet routines that they almost disappear into the background. Yet this morning carries a different purpose. The travellers are not simply moving west. They are measuring a continent that much of their nation has never truly seen. Knowledge begins with careful observation. Lewis and Clark understand that memory alone cannot guide future travellers. Every bend in the river, every tributary, every change in elevation must be recorded as accurately as possible. Blank spaces on maps will only disappear through patient work performed one careful mile at a time. The task sounds simple. It is anything but. Modern maps, printed with astonishing precision, are still generations away. There are no satellites passing silently overhead. No aerial photographs exist. Every distance must be estimated or measured through disciplined observation. Every direction depends upon careful navigation using the sun, the stars, and finely crafted scientific instruments carried with remarkable care. Research discussed by historians at Columbia University emphasizes that the mapping completed during the expedition dramatically improved geographic understanding of Western North America. Their records corrected numerous earlier assumptions while providing practical information for future exploration and commerce. Historians continue debating the remarkable accuracy achieved under such difficult conditions. Some scholars emphasize the extraordinary skill demonstrated by Clark's cartography. Others point out that later surveys naturally refined many details without diminishing the expedition's impressive accomplishments. Both perspectives remind you how knowledge gradually improves over time. You watch Clark remove folded sheets of heavy paper from a carefully protected case. The edges have already begun showing signs of constant use. Pencil marks cover portions of the map, while blank sections still wait patiently for new information. He studies the river quietly, then he begins drawing. Each curve receives careful attention. Nearby hills become reference points. Islands are marked. Distances are estimated through experience gained over countless hours of steady travel. There is something deeply satisfying about watching uncertainty slowly transform into understanding. Lewis works nearby with equal concentration. He records observations about weather, soil, vegetation, and the movement of the river itself. A slight change in the current today may become valuable information for someone traveling this route years later. Nothing feels wasted. Every note has purpose. You imagine the journals resting safely inside waterproof coverings each evening. Their pages gradually fill with neat handwriting describing places that very few Americans have ever seen. Those words will eventually travel farther than the expedition itself, reaching libraries, universities, government offices, and curious readers throughout the young republic. A continent is being introduced through ink. The boats continue upstream beneath a sky of brilliant blue. The river narrows slightly before widening once again around a series of wooded islands. Some channels appear inviting until hidden sandbars suddenly interrupt the current. Clark quietly signals the lead boat. The course changes, only by a few yards. The adjustment prevents hours of unnecessary labour. Experience accumulates almost invisibly. You begin noticing how often the leaders stop to observe rather than hurry forward. They climb small hills overlooking the valley. They compare compass readings with the direction of the river. They pause long enough to confirm what they believe they have seen. Patience saves mistakes. The frontier rewards careful eyes. Research highlighted by historians associated with the University of Wisconsin has shown that repeated observations often improve the reliability of expedition records. Rather than relying upon first impressions alone, Lewis and Clark have frequently confirmed important geographic details whenever circumstances allowed. Late in the morning, the expedition encounters an unusually high bluff rising sharply above the Missouri. The climb is steep, yet curiosity proves stronger than fatigue. Several men follow Clark toward the summit while others remain below with the boats. The ascent demands effort. Loose stones shift beneath your boots. Dry grass brushes against your legs. Warm sunlight reflects from pale rock surfaces. When you finally reach the top, the view steals your attention completely. The river winds across the landscape like an enormous ribbon of polished bronze. Forests stretch along its banks before giving way to open prairie beyond. In every direction the horizon appears astonishingly distant. For several quiet moments nobody speaks. The silence feels earned. You begin understanding why elevated viewpoints matter so much. From the water, each bend hides what comes next. From the bluff, patterns become visible. Tributaries reveal themselves. Hills form recognizable chains. The landscape begins telling a larger story. Clark studies everything carefully. His pencil moves once again. Lines become rivers. Marks become hills. Blank paper slowly becomes geography. As the expedition descends toward the boats, you notice fresh animal tracks crossing the dusty ground. Some belong to deer, others appear much larger. Lewis kneels to examine them. The impressions are deep and wide. Bison have passed this way recently. Their presence confirms reports shared earlier by indigenous communities, somewhere beyond the next series of valleys. Enormous herds likely continue their ancient migrations across the grasslands. The frontier is revealing itself piece by piece, never all at once. By midday, the travellers pause beside a small creek flowing into the Missouri. Crystal clear water spills over smooth stones before disappearing into the muddy river. The contrast catches everyone's attention. Several men refill water containers, others wash dust from their faces. The cool water feels wonderfully refreshing after the warm climb. Lunch is quiet today. Fresh fish caught that morning cooks over a modest fire while coarse bread warms beside glowing coals. The aroma drifts gently through the shade beneath towering sycamore trees. You hear only simple sounds: wood crackling, water flowing, leaves moving softly above. The afternoon brings another opportunity for careful measurement. Lewis removes his sextant with deliberate caution. Every instrument must remain protected from unnecessary damage. He waits patiently for the proper moment before recording observations that will later help establish their position with greater confidence. Science moves slowly. Accuracy demands patience. Historians have long admired the expedition's commitment to combining practical travel with disciplined scientific inquiry. Although some measurements naturally contain small errors, the overall achievement remains extraordinary considering the limited technology available during the early 19th century. As sunlight begins softening toward evening, the boats continue steadily upstream. The valley grows quieter. Long shadows stretch across the river. A pair of bald eagles glide effortlessly above the water before disappearing towards distant trees. Camp is established upon a broad terrace overlooking the Missouri. From this slightly elevated ground, the sunset appears magnificent. Warm shades of orange and crimson spread across the western sky, while the river reflects every changing colour. The day's maps are carefully reviewed. Journal pages are protected from evening moisture. Specimens collected during the afternoon are organised with remarkable care. Nothing important is left until tomorrow. Night settles gently around the camp. Firelight flickers across faces tired from climbing, rowing, measuring, and recording above you. Countless stars emerge one by one, forming silent patterns that have guided travellers for generations. You look west once more. The map still contains many empty spaces, but tonight there are fewer than yesterday. With every careful observation, every measured distance, and every thoughtful line drawn upon waiting paper, the American frontier becomes a little less mysterious, proving that some of history's greatest discoveries are made not through sudden triumph, but through patient attention to the smallest details. Your thoughts drift gently into another peaceful morning as the expedition leaves behind yet another quiet campsite beside the Missouri River. The rising sun spreads warm light across the valley, turning the tall grasses into waves of gold that move softly beneath a steady breeze. The cool air carries the scent of damp soil, fresh willow bark, and the faint sweetness of wildflowers growing along the riverbank. Everything feels calm, yet curiosity grows stronger with every passing mile. The farther west you travel, the more the natural world begins revealing creatures that few Americans have ever seen with their own eyes. Stories carried east by fur traders have spoken of enormous animals, strange birds, and unfamiliar landscapes. But stories rarely capture reality. Reality proves far more remarkable. The boats continue slowly against the current while Lewis constantly scans both riverbanks. His notebook never seems far from reach. Every unusual movement in the distance immediately captures his attention. Science travels beside wonder. The expedition soon notices a group of graceful white birds standing quietly in shallow water. Their long necks curve elegantly while broad wings catch the early sunlight. American white pelicans. Several men stop rowing for a moment simply to watch. The birds lift into the air almost together, their enormous wings beating slowly before they circle above the river in perfect formation. The sight feels peaceful, almost dreamlike. Lewis carefully records their appearance, noting details that may seem ordinary to future generations but remain extraordinary discoveries for many readers back east. Research discussed by historians at Cornell University has highlighted the remarkable contribution the expedition made to American natural history by documenting species unfamiliar to many Eastern scientists. Their observations significantly expanded scientific understanding of the continent's biodiversity during the early 19th century. Historians still debate exactly how many species were completely unfamiliar to American scholars before the expedition. Some argue that traders had already described many animals informally, while others emphasize that careful scientific documentation represented an entirely different level of knowledge. The distinction matters. Observation becomes understanding only when it is recorded carefully. As the morning continues, movement appears along the distant shoreline. At first it resembles drifting shadows among the grass. Then the shapes become clearer. A herd of elk, dozens of them. The animals move with quiet confidence across an open meadow before pausing to study the passing boats. Large antlers rise above the tall grass like the branches of young trees. Nobody speaks. The silence itself becomes part of the experience. Even the river seems quieter for a few moments. Eventually the herd disappears into scattered woodland with remarkable speed despite the size of the animals. The frontier always offers only brief glimpses. You begin realizing that wildlife here exists on a scale unfamiliar to most Eastern Americans. Animals still roam according to ancient patterns established long before roads. Fences or growing towns interrupted their movements. The landscape belongs equally to them, perhaps even more so. By late morning, another discovery awaits. Fresh tracks cover a muddy stretch of shoreline where the boats pause briefly to rest. Lewis kneels immediately. Clark joins him. The footprints are enormous. Each print presses deeply into the soft mud, leaving no doubt about the animal's impressive size. Bison, very recent. The men quietly examine broken grass nearby, confirming that a large herd has passed through not long before their arrival. Excitement spreads naturally across the expedition. For many of the younger men, the possibility of finally seeing living bison feels almost unbelievable. The stories they heard back home suddenly become real. Research associated with historians at the University of Kansas has emphasized that early expedition journals provided valuable descriptions of bison populations, before later decades dramatically reduced their numbers across the Great Plains. These observations remain important historical records of an ecosystem that would soon change profoundly. The afternoon grows warmer as the boats continue upstream. Insects buzz gently above patches of wildflowers. Dragonflies dart across the water with astonishing speed, their delicate wings sparkling whenever sunlight catches them. Nature feels endlessly busy, yet never hurried. You notice Lewis stopping again, this time beside a cluster of unfamiliar flowering plants growing near the riverbank. He carefully studies each stem before collecting several specimens. Nothing is rushed. Roots remain intact. Leaves are examined. Flowers are pressed carefully between sheets of paper. Botanical collecting requires patience as much as curiosity. The expedition understands that these plants may eventually reach scientists thousands of miles away. Every specimen carries information about climate, soil, elevation, and seasonal change. Even a single flower tells part of the frontier's story. Nearby, Clark studies the surrounding terrain while making another rough sketch of the valley. The combination of maps, journals, and natural specimens gradually creates an increasingly complete portrait of the American West. Knowledge grows quietly, page by page, mile by mile. The expedition soon rounds another broad bend where sudden movement captures everyone's attention once more. A beaver! The animal slips effortlessly through calm water before climbing onto a partially submerged log. Its thick fur glistens beneath the afternoon sun while its broad tail rests motionless against the wet wood. Few creatures symbolize the frontier more completely. The fur trade has already transformed vast portions of North America. Trappers, traders, and merchants value beaver pelts enormously, connecting remote rivers with international markets across the Atlantic. Yet here, the beaver knows nothing about distant economies. It simply continues building its home. Modern historians frequently remind readers that wildlife shaped exploration just as surely as geography did. Rivers rich with beaver attracted traders. Herds of game supported travelers. Seasonal migrations influenced movement across enormous distances. Nature constantly guided human decisions. Clouds drift lazily overhead as afternoon slowly begins fading toward evening. A gentle breeze cools the valley after the day's warmth. Cottonwood leaves shimmer with soft silver flashes whenever the wind passes through their branches. The boats finally reach another suitable campsite. Routine begins almost immediately. Firewood is gathered. Cooking pots are unpacked. Fishing lines are prepared. Several men successfully catch fresh catfish before sunset, providing a welcome change from dried provisions. The rich aroma of roasting fish soon fills the evening air, while smoke rises slowly toward the darkening sky. Conversation tonight feels unusually cheerful. The day's wildlife sightings have lifted everyone's spirits. Someone describes the enormous elk once again. Another insists the bison tracks appeared even larger than they first seemed. Lewis quietly smiles while continuing his journal entries. Facts remain separate from exaggeration. That discipline matters. As darkness settles across the river valley, frogs begin calling from nearby wetlands. Fireflies drift lazily through the tall grass, their tiny lights appearing and disappearing like distant stars. You sit beside the fading campfire. Warmth reaches your tired hands. The smell of wood smoke settles gently into your clothing. Somewhere beyond the edge of the camp, unseen animals continue their nightly routines completely undisturbed by human history. The realization feels strangely comforting. The frontier is not simply a place waiting for people to arrive. It is already alive. Every river bend, every prairie, every forest, and every marsh supports countless lives moving according to rhythms far older than the expedition itself. As the fire burns lower and the stars brighten overhead, you understand that the American West is revealing more than new territory. It is revealing an astonishing natural world whose beauty, abundance, and quiet complexity will remain among the expedition's greatest discoveries. Long after the journey itself has become history, your thoughts continue following the Missouri as another gentle sunrise unfolds across the wide frontier. The river glows softly beneath pale orange light, while a thin veil of mist rises from its muddy surface. The morning feels peaceful enough that it's easy to forget how much determination every mile still requires. The boats leave camp shortly after breakfast. Their familiar rhythm begins once again. Oars dip into the current. Long poles press against the riverbed. Strong hands tighten around thick ropes. The expedition has now spent many weeks living almost entirely according to the river's demands. Days no longer feel separate from one another. Instead, they blend into a steady pattern of movement, labor, observation, and quiet endurance. The frontier slowly reshapes everyone. You begin noticing changes that would have seemed almost invisible at first. Faces have grown darker beneath the summer sun. Hands have become rougher from constant work. Boots carry permanent stains from mud and river water. Comfort has quietly disappeared. Resilience has quietly taken its place. The Missouri offers little sympathy this morning. Overnight rains farther upstream have strengthened the current. Water rushes around hidden sandbars with greater force than before, and each bend demands careful attention. The river appears calm from a distance. It is anything but calm. Clark studies the current carefully before signaling the crew toward a narrower channel along the northern bank. The adjustment seems small, yet everyone understands how easily a poor decision could waste hours of exhausting effort. Experience speaks softly. Wisdom often looks ordinary. Modern historians have emphasized that the expedition's survival depended less upon dramatic acts of courage than upon thousands of practical decisions made every single day. Research discussed by scholars at the University of North Carolina notes that careful judgment about routes, weather, and camp locations consistently reduced unnecessary risks throughout the journey. Historians still debate which hardships weighed most heavily upon the expedition during these early years. Some point toward the relentless physical labor of river travel. Others believe the emotional strain of prolonged uncertainty deserves equal attention. The journals reveal evidence supporting both interpretations. By late morning, the current becomes especially difficult. The boats can no longer rely primarily upon poles and oars. Several men climb ashore carrying long coils of rope over their shoulders. You follow them. The riverbank offers no smooth path. Mud clings stubbornly to every step. Tree roots twist across the ground like hidden traps. Thick brush catches clothing and slows every movement. The men fasten heavy ropes securely to the boats before leaning forward together. Their bodies form a single, determined line moving slowly upstream against the full resistance of water and gravity. Step, pull, breathe, repeat. The rhythm becomes almost hypnotic. Sweat darkens wool shirts despite the morning breeze. Heavy boots sink into soft earth before being lifted once again. Shoulders ache beneath the constant strain of the ropes. Nobody complains. There is simply no energy left for complaint. You feel the rough fibers pressing against your own shoulder. Every step demands balance as well as strength. Occasionally someone slips in the mud, yet nearby companions immediately help regain footing before continuing forward. No one succeeds alone. The expedition understands this lesson more deeply with each passing day. Research highlighted by historians associated with Brown University has shown that cooperation became one of the defining strengths of the Corps of Discovery. Daily survival depended upon shared effort rather than individual achievement, creating a practical culture of mutual responsibility. Eventually the river relaxes its grip. The boats move into calmer water, allowing everyone a brief opportunity to rest. Several men kneel beside the shoreline, washing cool water across tired faces. Others simply sit quietly beneath scattered cottonwood trees, breathing deeply while muscles slowly recover. The pause feels precious. Even short moments of stillness become valuable gifts. A cool breeze carries the scent of wet clay and crushed prairie grass. Somewhere nearby, a woodpecker taps steadily against an old tree trunk. The sound echoes gently through the quiet valley. Nature never truly falls silent. It simply changes its voice. Lunch is modest but welcome. Dried venison, coarse bread, and a handful of wild berries gathered earlier provide enough nourishment to continue the journey. The berries offer a burst of sweetness that briefly lifts everyone's spirits. Simple pleasures matter here, far more than they once did. As the afternoon unfolds, another challenge quietly appears. One of the boats scrapes against a submerged log hidden beneath the muddy water. The impact is not violent, yet everyone immediately understands the potential danger. The boat is guided carefully towards shore. Inspection begins at once. Fortunately, the damage proves minor. A small crack has appeared between two planks, left unattended. It could eventually become serious. Repaired immediately, it remains only an inconvenience. Several men retrieve repair tools from carefully packed supply chests. Fresh pitch is warmed above a small fire. Wooden wedges are shaped with practiced hands. Within an hour, the repair is complete. The expedition moves forward once more. This ordinary moment reminds you that survival often depends upon responding calmly rather than dramatically. Tiny problems solved today prevent enormous problems tomorrow. Lewis quietly records the incident inside his journal. Nothing escapes documentation. The journals are becoming more than travel diaries. They are practical manuals for anyone who may someday follow the same rivers. Future explorers will learn not only where the Missouri flows, but how easily hidden obstacles can interrupt even the most careful journey. Late in the afternoon, clouds drift across the sky, providing welcome shade from the summer sun. The changing light transforms the landscape. Tall grasses ripple like waves across the prairie. Cottonwood leaves shimmer with alternating flashes of green and silver. A small herd of pronghorn appears briefly upon a distant hillside. Their speed astonishes everyone. Within moments they vanish beyond the rolling grasslands. The frontier constantly reminds you that many of its greatest wonders refuse to remain still for long. As evening approaches, the expedition chooses a campsite upon slightly elevated ground overlooking the river. Experience has already taught the leaders to avoid low areas where sudden rain could quickly flood the camp during the night. Preparation becomes instinct. Firewood is gathered before darkness. Boats are secured carefully. Weapons are cleaned. Journals receive another day's observations. The familiar routines continue. Dinner cooks slowly inside heavy iron kettles. The comforting aroma of stew rises into the cooling evening air while tired companions gather around the fire. Faces glow softly beneath flickering light, As conversation turns toward the day's challenges, someone jokes about the stubborn log that tried to stop the journey. Laughter follows, not loud, just enough. Beyond the firelight, the Missouri continues flowing steadily through the darkness, carrying reflections of countless stars across its restless surface. Frogs sing from nearby marshes while insects hum gently among the tall grasses. You sit quietly, feeling warmth return to tired hands. The day's hardships already seem less important than the quiet satisfaction of overcoming them together. The frontier has not become easier. You have simply become stronger. With every repaired boat, every shared burden, every careful decision, and every mile earned through honest effort, the expedition discovers that endurance is built slowly, almost invisibly, until one day it feels as natural as breathing beside the endless Missouri River. Your thoughts continue drifting westward as another cool dawn settles gently across the Missouri River. A thin blanket of mist floats above the quiet water, while the first rays of sunlight slowly paint the eastern sky in soft shades of gold and pale blue. The camp wakes gradually, almost reluctantly, after another night beneath countless stars. The morning feels peaceful, yet every peaceful morning brings another opportunity to learn. Breakfast is prepared with practiced efficiency. Fresh fish caught before sunrise cooks beside small cakes of coarse cornmeal. Coffee simmers quietly in blackened kettles, while smoke rises through still air before disappearing among the tall cottonwood branches overhead. The familiar routine has become comforting. Even the smallest habits now carry meaning. A sharpened knife returned to its proper place, a cooking pot cleaned before departure, a blanket rolled tightly against expected rain. The expedition understands that careful attention to ordinary details creates extraordinary resilience. Soon the boats return to the river once more. Their steady progress upstream continues beneath a sky so clear that distant hawks seem suspended in endless blue. The current remains challenging. The crew remains determined. As the hours pass, the expedition approaches another region known to support indigenous communities connected through long-established trade networks. Lewis and Clark understand that successful exploration depends not only upon rivers and maps, but also upon respectful relationships with the people who already know these landscapes better than anyone arriving from the east. The boats slow naturally. No one appears anxious, only attentive. Research discussed by historians at the University of Michigan has emphasized that trade served as one of the most important forms of communication across the North American frontier, long before American expansion accelerated after the Louisiana Purchase. Goods, knowledge, diplomatic relationships, and cultural traditions often travel together along interconnected routes extending hundreds of miles. Historians continue debating the precise economic influence of these regional trade networks during the early 19th century. Some emphasize the remarkable complexity of exchange systems already operating across the plains and river valleys. Others focus more heavily upon how expanding American commerce gradually reshaped existing patterns over time. The evidence suggests both processes unfolded together. As the expedition comes ashore, familiar rituals of careful introduction begin once again. Friendly gestures replace hurried movements. Gifts are brought forward with quiet respect rather than display. Metal knives, bright cloth, small mirrors, needles, useful objects. The value of these items lies not only in the materials themselves, but in what they represent. Peaceful intention. Nearby, members of the local community respond with equal patience. Their expressions reveal understandable curiosity. Children observe quietly from behind older relatives while experienced hunters study the visitors with calm attention. Born from years of experience, nobody seems eager to rush. Trust grows slowly. That pace suits everyone. Communication remains imperfect. Words pass through interpreters whenever possible. Gestures fill the remaining gaps. Smiles accomplish more than lengthy speeches. You begin noticing that trade is about far more than exchanging objects. Knowledge flows in every direction. One elder points toward distant hills while describing seasonal hunting grounds through careful gestures and familiar landmarks. Another explains changes in river depth that occur during different times of the year. Hunters indicate safe crossings where future travelers may avoid dangerous currents. The expedition listens carefully. Every conversation adds another piece to the growing understanding of the frontier. Modern historians associated with the University of Oklahoma have often emphasized that Indigenous knowledge dramatically improved the practical success of Western exploration. Local expertise concerning geography, weather, wildlife, and travel routes frequently proved impossible to replace through observation alone. The exchange continues throughout the afternoon. Lewis records observations inside his journal with remarkable care. He describes local agricultural practices, housing methods, clothing materials, and regional customs without rushing to conclusions. Clark quietly updates his maps whenever reliable geographic information becomes available. Neither man assumes complete understanding. Humility becomes another useful tool. The village itself reflects generations of adaptation to the surrounding landscape. Well-built shelters stand upon carefully chosen ground above seasonal flood levels. Drying racks hold fish preserved for future meals. Gardens nearby contain cultivated crops thriving beside the rich river soil. Nothing appears temporary. Everything reflects experience accumulated across many lifetimes. The smell of roasting corn drifts gently through the warm afternoon air. Fresh herbs add earthy fragrance to cooking fires, while children laugh nearby as they play games completely unaffected by the historical significance later generations may assign to these meetings. Life continues naturally. History simply passes through it. You notice skilled artisans working patiently with materials gathered from the surrounding environment. One shapes wood into practical tools. Another repairs clothing using carefully prepared animal sinew. Decorative beadwork catches sunlight with quiet elegance. Beauty and usefulness exist together. The frontier encourages both. As conversations continue, trade goods change hands gradually. Metal tools attract understandable interest because they reduce labor that once required stone or bone implements. In return, the expedition receives valuable information regarding rivers farther west, neighboring communities, and regions where game remains abundant. Nobody leaves empty-handed. Everyone gains something. The afternoon slowly begins giving way to evening. Long shadows stretch across the village while the golden light softens every detail of the surrounding landscape. Lewis pauses briefly before closing his journal, reflecting quietly upon another day in which cooperation has accomplished more than force ever could. Historians sometimes disagree about the long-term consequences of these early encounters. Some emphasize moments of mutual respect and practical collaboration. Others remind us that the decades following the expedition brought profound changes, many of them deeply difficult for Indigenous communities. Both realities deserve careful recognition. The future remains unwritten. For now, you remain within these early years, when conversations, shared meals, and exchanged knowledge still shape much of the journey. As the expedition prepares to depart, farewells remain warm but uncomplicated, hands are raised in acknowledgement. Small gifts are accepted with gratitude. The boats gradually return to the broad Missouri, while figures upon the shoreline slowly fade into the distance. The river carries everyone onward once more. Evening approaches peacefully. Camp is established beside a quiet meadow bordered by tall cottonwoods swaying gently in the cooling breeze. Firewood is gathered. Supper cooks slowly above glowing coals. The comforting smell of roasted fish and fresh herbs fills the air while journals receive another careful evening's work. You sit beside the fire as darkness settles across the valley. Warm light flickers against weathered faces. The river whispers beyond the edge of camp. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes begin calling beneath the rising moon. You reflect upon the quiet exchanges of the day. No dramatic battles, no triumphant speeches, only patient conversation, practical cooperation, and shared humanity meeting beside one of North America's great rivers. The frontier reveals itself once again as something far richer than empty land awaiting discovery. It is a living network of people, knowledge, traditions, and relationships that quietly guide every successful mile of the expedition. And as the fire slowly settles into glowing embers beneath the immense western sky, you realize that some of history's most lasting bridges are built not from stone or timber, but from respect offered freely across unfamiliar worlds. Your thoughts continue flowing with the steady rhythm of the Missouri as another gentle sunrise spreads across the frontier. The eastern sky glows softly behind distant trees, while cool air drifts over the quiet water. A thin layer of dew sparkles upon the prairie grasses, and every breath carries the fresh scent of damp earth mixed with wood smoke from the last glowing embers of the night's fire. The camp begins waking before daylight fully arrives. One man quietly adds dry branches to the fire. Another fills an iron kettle from the river. Someone stretches tired shoulders after another night spent upon firm ground beneath a simple blanket. The routine has become familiar enough that very few words are needed. Each person already knows the day's first task. You begin noticing something that would have been easy to overlook during the expedition's early weeks. Although history often celebrates famous explorers, remarkable journeys are rarely shaped by famous men alone. Many quieter figures influence success every single day. Some repair damaged clothing before cold weather arrives. Some prepare food that keeps everyone strong enough to travel. Some calm tensions before disagreements grow larger. Others build relationships that no map can ever record. Their names seldom appear in headlines. Their contributions become essential nonetheless. Among the people quietly shaping this journey is Sacagawea. Though during these early years of the expedition she has not yet joined the travellers, her future role reminds you that women across the frontier have long carried knowledge, resilience, and practical wisdom that often remained overlooked in official accounts. Even before her famous participation, countless women already influence frontier life in ways both visible and unseen. Research discussed by historians at the University of Nebraska has emphasized that women played indispensable roles throughout early frontier communities by managing households, preserving food, maintaining trade relationships, producing clothing, caring for children, and sustaining family life under demanding conditions. Their labour often determined whether settlements survived difficult seasons. Historians continue debating whether traditional historical narratives have underestimated the influence of women during Western expansion. Many modern scholars argue that earlier accounts focused too heavily upon military leaders and explorers, while giving far less attention to the women whose daily work sustained frontier society. That broader perspective changes how you see the landscape. The frontier is no longer simply a stage for explorers. It is home. You imagine a small frontier cabin hundreds of miles east of the expedition's present location. A mother rises before sunrise to prepare breakfast while younger children still sleep beneath wool blankets. Bread bakes slowly inside a simple oven. Fresh water must be carried from a nearby stream before the day's work truly begins. Nothing about her morning feels extraordinary, yet every task matters. Food must be preserved, clothing must be repaired, gardens require attention, illness demands care, life continues because someone quietly keeps it moving. Back beside the Missouri, the expedition pushes steadily upstream beneath another clear summer sky. Birds fill the cottonwood branches with cheerful calls, while dragonflies skim gracefully across calm stretches of water. Lewis studies flowering plants along the shoreline once again. Clark compares the day's progress with earlier map sketches, adjusting details whenever fresh observations improve accuracy. The familiar partnership continues. Each man trusts the other completely. Nearby, several members of the crew begin discussing stories they have heard from traders regarding families living farther west. Some describe women managing isolated trading posts, while husbands spend months trapping along distant rivers. Others speak of indigenous women whose remarkable knowledge of medicinal plants has saved countless lives across generations. The conversations remain respectful. Experience earns admiration wherever it is found. Modern historians associated with the University of Washington have highlighted how women frequently served as cultural intermediaries across portions of the North American frontier. Through family relationships, trade, agriculture, language, and diplomacy, many women quietly connected communities that might otherwise have struggled to communicate effectively. The boats round another broad bend where the riverbank opens into a peaceful meadow filled with wildflowers. Purple blooms sway gently beside yellow blossoms that stretch toward the morning sun. Butterflies drift lazily from flower to flower while bees continue their endless work among the blossoms. The entire valley feels wonderfully alive. You pause for a moment. The beauty seems almost effortless. Yet survival here is never effortless. Every living thing depends upon careful adaptation. As midday approaches, the expedition stops beside a shaded grove where cool spring water flows from beneath a limestone hillside before joining the Missouri. The fresh water tastes wonderfully cold after hours beneath the growing summer sun. Lunch remains simple: fresh fish, coarse bread, wild berries gathered along the trail. One young soldier quietly shares part of his meal with another, whose morning hunting efforts brought little success. The exchange lasts only a few seconds, yet it speaks volumes about how the expedition has changed. Generosity has become habit. Nobody counts favors anymore. Everyone understands that tomorrow the situation may be reversed. The afternoon brings another opportunity to meet travelers moving along established regional trade routes. Among them are several families journeying between communities rather than military parties or commercial caravans. Children ride comfortably beside older relatives. Women carry carefully prepared bundles containing clothing, food, and practical tools. The pace remains unhurried. Life continues according to familiar seasonal rhythms rather than distant political events. Lewis greets the travelers politely. Through patient communication and shared goodwill, useful information is exchanged once again. Safe river crossings, recent weather, locations where game remains plentiful, areas recently affected by flooding. Practical knowledge travels faster than official reports. Historians still debate how often informal exchanges like these influenced major expeditions compared with formal diplomatic meetings. Surviving journals suggest that brief conversations with ordinary travelers frequently provided valuable information that never appeared in official government planning. Sometimes history advances through quiet encounters, not grand ceremonies. The afternoon sun begins lowering toward the western horizon, casting long golden shadows across the broad prairie. Tall grasses ripple beneath a gentle breeze while distant deer move cautiously between scattered groves of trees. The boats continue their patient journey. The river seems almost familiar now, yet every new mile still offers something unexpected. As evening approaches, camp is established upon gently rising ground overlooking the Missouri. Firewood is collected before darkness arrives. Clothing dampened by river spray is hung to dry. Cooking fires fill the cooling air with the comforting aroma of stew prepared from fresh fish and dried vegetables. Several men quietly repair moccasins worn thin by weeks of travel. Another carefully patches a torn blanket. Lewis organizes botanical specimens collected throughout the day. Clark reviews newly completed sections of his map before protecting them inside waterproof coverings. The ordinary work continues. It always will. Night settles peacefully across the valley. Crickets begin their steady chorus while stars slowly emerge above the darkening sky. A cool breeze moves gently through the cottonwood leaves, creating a soft whisper that blends almost perfectly with the distant sound of flowing water. You sit beside the fading fire. Warmth reaches your hands. The smell of smoke settles comfortably into your clothing. The frontier feels less mysterious than before, yet no less magnificent. You realize that history often remembers remarkable leaders because their names appear upon documents and maps. But behind every successful expedition stand countless quieter lives whose patience, labor, kindness, and practical wisdom make every achievement possible. As the last glowing embers slowly fade beneath the immense western sky, you understand that the story of the American frontier belongs not only to those who explored it, but also to those who quietly sustained life within it every single day. Your mind drifts gently into another quiet morning as the first light slips across the wide Missouri Valley. The river reflects a pale silver sky before the rising sun gradually warms the water into soft shades of gold. A cool breeze carries the clean scent of wet grass, fresh cottonwood leaves, and the faint sweetness of flowering prairie plants. The day begins almost silently. A kettle hums above the fire. A horse grazes beside the camp. Someone folds a blanket with slow, practiced hands. Nothing feels hurried. The expedition has learned that nature sets the true pace of travel. Human schedules matter very little beside changing weather, shifting rivers, and distant storms gathering beyond the horizon, you notice Lewis standing quietly near the shoreline before the boats depart. Rather than studying his journal, he studies the sky itself. Thin clouds drift high above the valley, their shapes revealing subtle changes in the wind. He pays close attention. Experience has taught him that weather speaks long before rain arrives. The frontier demands this kind of awareness. A comfortable morning can become a dangerous afternoon with surprising speed. A gentle breeze may strengthen into powerful wind. Clear skies may disappear behind towering clouds before camp is safely established. Nature always has the final word. Research discussed by historians at the University of California has emphasized that environmental conditions shape nearly every important decision made during the expedition. River levels, seasonal weather, vegetation, and changing terrain often determine the pace of travel more than any human plan. Historians still debate whether the greatest obstacle facing early Western explorers was geography itself or the unpredictable combination of weather and terrain. Some scholars emphasize mountain barriers, while others argue that rivers, storms, flooding, and seasonal change repeatedly created equally demanding challenges. The evidence reminds you that the frontier cannot be understood through maps alone. It must also be understood through climate. The boats continue upstream beneath a brightening sky. The current flows steadily against them while long grasses bend gently beneath the morning wind. Small ripples spread across the muddy water, hinting that the calm conditions may not last. For now, the journey remains peaceful. You hear only familiar sounds. Water brushing against wooden hulls, oars dipping steadily, birdsong drifting from distant trees. The frontier seems almost welcoming. As the hours pass, the surrounding landscape gradually opens into wider prairie. Forest becomes less continuous. Broad fields of tall grass stretch toward an endless horizon, where earth and sky appear almost indistinguishable. The openness feels astonishing. There are few landmarks. Distance becomes difficult to judge. What appears to be a nearby hill may require hours to reach. The prairie quietly reshapes your sense of space. Clark pauses several times to update his maps. Without mountains or dense forests to guide orientation, careful observation becomes even more important. Every creek, isolated grove of trees, and distinctive bluff serves as a valuable reference point. The land appears simple. It is remarkably complex. Lewis notices changing vegetation as well. Taller prairie grasses replace many familiar eastern species. Wildflowers bloom in scattered clusters across the rolling landscape, while hardy shrubs thrive where soil becomes drier. Each plant tells a story. Each story reveals another piece of the frontier. Modern historians associated with Iowa State University have noted that the transition from eastern woodland ecosystems to expansive prairie environments represented one of the expedition's most significant ecological observations. The journals carefully documented changes that later scientists continued studying for generations. Around midday, the breeze strengthens noticeably. Cottonwood branches sway more vigorously. The surface of the Missouri loses its smooth appearance as countless small waves begin dancing across the water. Clark quietly studies the sky. Lewis looks toward the western horizon. Dark clouds are beginning to gather. The crew does not panic. They prepare. Loose equipment is secured inside the boats. Waterproof coverings are fastened carefully over journals, scientific instruments, and collected specimens. Every person understands the routine because practice has transformed preparation into instinct. Preparation creates calm. That lesson has become deeply familiar. The wind arrives before the rain. Strong gusts sweep across the prairie, flattening tall grasses into broad waves that move across the landscape with remarkable speed. Dust rises briefly from exposed river banks before disappearing. The river changes immediately. Small waves become larger. The current feels more unpredictable. Steering requires greater concentration. You grip the edge of the boat as wind pushes against both travelers and water. The effort required to maintain direction increases with every passing minute. Still, nobody rushes. Experience encourages patience. Eventually, Clark guides the expedition toward a sheltered bend where high banks and thick stands of cottonwood offer protection from the strengthening storm. The landing requires careful coordination. Heavy ropes are thrown ashore. Boats are secured firmly. Supplies are carried above the waterline. Only moments later, rain begins. Large drops strike the leaves overhead with steady rhythm. The smell of fresh rain upon dry prairie soil rises immediately, filling the air with an earthy fragrance unlike anything found in crowded eastern towns. You breathe deeply. The scent feels wonderfully clean. Thunder rolls softly across the distant plains. Lightning flashes far beyond the western horizon, illuminating layers of dark cloud before fading once again. The storm never becomes violent. It simply reminds everyone who truly commands the frontier. For nearly an hour, the expedition waits beneath temporary shelters while rain washes dust from clothing. Boats and prairie grass alike. Conversation remains quiet. One man repairs a loose bootlace. Another carefully sharpens a hatchet. Lewis reviews earlier journal entries while waiting for the weather to pass. Even delays become productive. Historians often observe that successful expeditions rarely viewed waiting as wasted time. Necessary pauses allowed equipment repairs, scientific observations, careful planning, and physical recovery, all of which contributed quietly to long-term success. Gradually the rain weakens. Clouds begin separating. A narrow beam of sunlight breaks through the western sky, illuminating thousands of raindrops still clinging to every blade of grass. The prairie sparkles. The entire landscape appears renewed. The boats return to the river beneath cool, fresh air. The afternoon feels calmer now, almost peaceful after the passing storm. Birds quickly return to the trees as though nothing unusual has happened. Nature moves forward without hesitation. The expedition does the same. As evening approaches, camp is established upon a broad rise overlooking both prairie and river from this elevated ground. You can see miles of gently rolling grass stretching toward the fading horizon. The view feels endless. Dinner cooks quietly over fresh firewood gathered after the rain. Steam rises from warm stew while damp clothing dries beside the flames. The comforting smell of wood smoke mixes with the clean fragrance left behind by the storm. Darkness settles slowly across the frontier. Stars emerge one by one above the cooling valley. The wind softens into little more than a whisper moving through the tall grass. You sit beside the fading fire, reflecting upon another day shaped entirely by the natural world. Rivers determined the route. Weather determined the pace. Wind determined the timing. Human determination mattered greatly, but only when it worked with the land rather than against it. You realize that the American frontier is teaching a quiet lesson repeated every single day. Nature is never merely scenery. It is the most powerful companion on the journey, and as the steady sound of the Missouri blends gently with the evening breeze, you understand that every mile westward begins not with commanding the wilderness, but with learning to listen to it. Your thoughts continue westward beneath another wide frontier sky as dawn quietly unfolds across the Missouri River. A cool breeze moves gently through the cottonwood branches, while the first rays of sunlight spread across the broad valley. The river appears peaceful once again, its muddy surface reflecting soft shades of gold and pale blue. The storm has passed. The journey continues. You wake to the familiar sounds that have gradually replaced the noises of towns and villages. Water laps softly against wooden boats tied securely along the riverbank. Birds greet the morning from distant trees, somewhere nearby. A horse snorts gently before lowering its head to graze. The wilderness has become home, at least for now. Breakfast is prepared with the same dependable routine that now guides every morning. Fresh coffee warms chilled hands while coarse bread and dried venison provide enough strength for another demanding day. Nobody lingers around the fire for long. There is always another mile ahead. As the boats push steadily into the current, your attention turns beyond the river itself. The farther west the expedition travels, the more frequently thoughts drift toward the unseen world beyond the horizon. Who else watches these rivers? Who else claims these lands? The frontier is not isolated from international politics. Long before the Louisiana Purchase, several European empires competed for influence across North America. although the United States now claims this immense territory. Maps and treaties cannot instantly erase generations of overlapping ambitions. The wilderness remains politically uncertain. Research discussed by historians at Georgetown University has emphasized that the Louisiana Purchase dramatically altered the balance of power in North America. Yet many practical questions regarding borders, trade, and influence remained unresolved during the early years that followed. Diplomacy continued long after the purchase itself. Historians still debate how clearly officials understood the western boundaries of Louisiana in 1803. Some scholars argue that uncertainty regarding the territory's true limits remained substantial for many years. Others believe political leaders accepted this ambiguity as an unavoidable consequence of acquiring such an enormous region. The frontier contains uncertainty in every direction, not only geography. As the boats move upstream, Lewis occasionally studies distant ridges through his telescope. Every unfamiliar landmark could carry practical importance. Rivers connect communities, trails reveal patterns of movement. Even smoke rising beyond distant hills may suggest travelers or villages hidden from immediate view. Observation becomes habit. The expedition must notice everything. You imagine Spanish officials farther southwest carefully following reports of American exploration. British traders continue operating throughout northern regions. French-speaking merchants remain active along important trade routes despite political changes. The continent has many voices, not just one. Clark quietly updates his maps while considering the broader picture. Every newly recorded stream or valley may eventually influence future diplomacy as much as future settlement. Maps are political tools. They are also scientific ones. The distinction often becomes difficult to separate. Modern historians associated with the University of Texas have frequently observed that accurate geographic knowledge strengthened diplomatic negotiations during the 19th century. Understanding rivers, mountains, and travel routes allowed governments to discuss boundaries with far greater confidence than vague assumptions ever could. By late morning, the expedition encounters several experienced fur traders traveling east with heavily loaded canoes. Their weathered faces immediately reveal years spent moving between distant trading posts and indigenous communities. The meeting feels relaxed. These men know the frontier well. Greetings are exchanged warmly. News passes from one group to another almost as naturally as the river itself. The traders describe changing conditions farther west, mentioning regions where recent flooding has altered familiar channels and areas where wildlife remains abundant. Their information proves valuable. Experience often outweighs rumour. The traders also speak quietly about distant political tensions. They mention occasional uncertainty regarding foreign claims, trading rights, and shifting alliances among different governments and indigenous nations. Nothing sounds immediately dangerous. Everything sounds complicated. The frontier refuses simple explanations. Lewis listens carefully without interrupting. He understands that every reliable conversation adds another piece to the larger puzzle surrounding Western North America. Historians continue discussing how information circulated through informal frontier networks during this period. Some argue that traders often possessed better practical knowledge than officials located thousands of miles away. Others caution that frontier reports occasionally blended accurate observation with understandable speculation. Wisdom requires careful judgment. Not every story becomes fact. The expedition thanks the traders before continuing upstream. Their canoes gradually disappear around a distant bend while the Missouri once again belongs only to flowing water. Quiet birds and patient travellers. The afternoon sun climbs steadily higher. Warmth spreads across the broad prairie. Grasshoppers leap through tall grass, disturbed by the gentle breeze. A pair of hawks circle silently overhead, their broad wings barely moving as they ride invisible currents of warm air. The landscape appears calm, yet beneath that calm lies constant change. You begin noticing old traces of earlier travellers. Narrow footpaths branch away from the river toward distant hills. Worn campsites suggest seasons of repeated use. Cut tree branches reveal places where others gathered firewood long before this expedition arrived. The frontier remembers everyone. Even after they leave, Lewis records these observations carefully. Human movement across the continent has always followed practical needs. Rivers provide transportation, meadows support game, fresh water determines campsites, geography quietly shapes history. Research highlighted by historians at the University of Wisconsin has shown that long-established indigenous travel corridors often influenced later American exploration routes. Many successful expeditions benefited, directly or indirectly, from pathways developed over generations rather than creating entirely new ones. As afternoon gradually softens, clouds drift lazily across the sky without threatening rain. The boats make steady progress while conversations remain thoughtful. One man wonders how many people have travelled this river before them. Another quietly replies that nobody could truly count. The answer feels appropriate. The Missouri has carried countless journeys, some recorded, many forgotten. Toward evening, the expedition selects another campsite overlooking a broad stretch of river where gentle bluffs provide protection from strong winds. Camp comes together with practiced efficiency developed through months of shared experience. Boats are secured, cooking fires are lit, supplies are organised, the familiar rhythm continues. Dinner tonight includes freshly caught fish seasoned with wild herbs gathered nearby. The comforting aroma drifts across the camp while the setting sun paints the western sky with deep shades of orange and crimson. The light lingers longer than expected. Nobody seems eager for it to end. As darkness settles across the valley, Lewis and Clark spend several quiet moments reviewing maps beside the fire. Newly added rivers, creeks, and landmarks gradually transform blank spaces into recognizable landscapes. The work feels satisfying. Far from complete, you sit nearby, watching sparks rise into the clear night sky. The river continues flowing steadily through the darkness, carrying reflections of brilliant stars toward distant places you have yet to see. A cool wind brushes gently across your face. The smell of wood smoke settles comfortably into your clothing. The frontier grows quieter, yet somehow larger. You realize that every mile traveled west is connected not only to rivers and wilderness, but also to diplomacy, commerce, and the ambitions of many different peoples whose futures will soon become increasingly intertwined. The American frontier is opening before your eyes, but it is never unfolding in isolation. It belongs to a continent already rich with history, relationships, and competing dreams, all moving together beneath the same vast western sky. Your thoughts continue drifting with the quiet rhythm of the Missouri as another peaceful dawn unfolds across the frontier. The eastern horizon glows softly while the river carries long ribbons of pale mist through the valley. The cool morning air feels wonderfully fresh, filled with the scent of damp earth, willow branches, and yesterday's campfire slowly fading into memory. Another day begins. Another page waits to be written. The expedition rises before sunrise as it always does. Blankets are folded neatly, cooking pots are cleaned, saddles, ropes, and supplies receive another careful inspection before the boats once again push into the patient current. Routine has become reassuring. It creates order where uncertainty never disappears. You notice something changing within the travellers themselves. During the earliest weeks, every unfamiliar sight inspired excitement. Every discovery felt extraordinary. Now curiosity remains just as strong, but it has become quieter, steadier, and more thoughtful. Experience has replaced surprise. The frontier is teaching patience. The boats move steadily beneath a bright summer sky while Clark quietly compares recent observations with earlier maps. Lewis organizes pages of notes already filling his journals. Together they realize something remarkable. The expedition is carrying far more than supplies. It is carrying knowledge home. Every carefully measured river bend, every botanical specimen, every observation of wildlife, every description of indigenous communities, every weather record, every sketch of distant hills. The collection grows larger every day. Modern historians have often described the Corps of Discovery as one of the most significant scientific expeditions in early American history. Research discussed by scholars at Harvard University emphasizes that the journals produced during these years became foundational sources for later geographers, naturalists, and historians seeking to understand the American West. Historians still debate which aspect of the expedition ultimately proved most influential. Some point toward geographic mapping, others emphasize botanical discoveries, zoological observations, or diplomatic relationships established along the journey. The expedition's lasting importance may rest precisely in the combination of all these achievements rather than any single accomplishment. Knowledge rarely travels alone. By mid-morning, the river valley widens once more. Broad stretches of prairie extend toward distant horizons, while scattered groves of cottonwood provide welcome shade along the shoreline. The air grows warmer. Dragonflies shimmer above the water. A pair of deer pause briefly before disappearing into tall grass. The landscape feels increasingly familiar. Yet Lewis refuses to allow familiarity to become carelessness. He continues recording even the smallest observations. A change in soil colour, a different flowering plant, an unusually shaped bluff. Each detail may later help explain larger patterns across the continent. Science often advances through careful repetition rather than dramatic discovery. You imagine future scholars opening these journals years from now. They will never smell the river or feel the summer wind across the prairie. Yet through careful writing, they may begin to understand something of this remarkable journey. Ink preserves memory. Memory preserves history. Research highlighted by historians associated with the University of Chicago has shown that the expedition's journals remain among the most valuable first-hand records of the early 19th century American frontier because they combine scientific observation with daily experience in extraordinary detail. Around midday, the expedition pauses beside a quiet stream flowing into the Missouri. The cool water runs over smooth stones before disappearing into the larger river. Lunch is simple. Fresh fish, cornmeal, dried fruit carefully preserved since departure. While the meal is prepared, Lewis spreads several plant specimens across clean cloth beneath the shade of a large cottonwood. Delicate flowers collected days earlier are already drying between carefully folded sheets of paper. Their colours begin fading. Their scientific value remains. Nearby, Clark studies the latest additions to his map. Rivers that once existed only as uncertain rumours now follow recognisable courses across the page. Hills have gained shape. Tributaries have found their proper places. Blank spaces continue shrinking. You quietly realise that the expedition is doing something deeply human. It is replacing uncertainty with understanding. The afternoon journey resumes beneath slowly drifting clouds. Gentle breezes keep the summer heat comfortable while birds continue moving through the trees along the riverbank. Conversation among the crew turns toward home. One man wonders how surprised his family will be when they eventually hear these stories. Another laughs softly, suggesting nobody back east will believe half of what they have seen. The thought seems entirely reasonable. How could someone who has never stood upon these endless prairies truly imagine them? How could words alone describe rivers stretching beyond sight or skies so vast they seem almost without end? Some experiences resist easy explanation. Historians often note that reports returning from Western expeditions transformed public imagination long before most Americans ever traveled beyond the Mississippi. Printed journals, official reports, and carefully prepared maps gradually replaced myth with increasingly reliable knowledge. Although wonder remained very much alive. Late in the afternoon, the expedition reaches a high overlook where the Missouri curves gracefully through an enormous valley. Clark climbs the bluff carrying his notebook while several companions follow behind. The view is breathtaking. The river winds like polished bronze beneath the afternoon sun. Forests border its banks. Prairie stretches endlessly beyond. Distant hills fade into a soft blue haze. For several long moments, nobody speaks. Silence feels entirely appropriate. Clark quietly sketches the scene before carefully marking important landmarks that future travellers may one day recognise. You realise that every line placed upon the page represents hours of difficult labour. No map appears by accident. Every measured distance required aching muscles. Every recorded stream required careful observation. Every landmark required patient attention. Knowledge carries weight, even when written on paper. As evening approaches, the expedition establishes camp beside a gently flowing creek where fresh water joins the Missouri. Firewood is gathered from fallen branches still dry beneath dense trees. Soon the familiar smell of wood smoke once again fills the cooling air. Dinner cooks slowly while several men clean equipment worn by weeks of constant use. A paddle receives fresh repairs. Leather straps are tightened. Boot soles are inspected carefully. Small problems remain small because someone notices them early. Lewis spends extra time organizing journal pages before storing them inside protective coverings. He understands that months of careful work could disappear if damaged by water or careless handling. The journals are becoming priceless, not because they belong to famous men, because they preserve a disappearing moment in history. Darkness gradually settles across the valley. Firelight flickers gently across weathered faces while the Missouri whispers softly beyond the edge of camp. Crickets begin their familiar evening chorus. Above, countless stars appear with astonishing clarity. You sit quietly beside the fading fire. The warmth reaches your hands. The cool night air brushes gently across your face. The frontier feels peaceful tonight. You understand that the greatest legacy of these early years may not be the miles travelled alone. It may be the careful knowledge gathered with patience, honesty, and remarkable discipline, ensuring that future generations would inherit not merely stories of the American West, but a deeper understanding of the land, its people, and the remarkable world that had always existed beyond the horizon. Your thoughts continue drifting westward as another peaceful morning arrives beside the broad Missouri River. A gentle layer of mist rises from the water before dissolving beneath the growing warmth of the sun. The valley feels wonderfully still. Only the steady murmur of the current and the distant songs of meadowlarks break the quiet. The expedition wakes slowly. A fire crackles back to life. Coffee begins to simmer. Someone quietly stretches sore shoulders before lifting another heavy barrel toward the waiting boats. The familiar rhythm comforts you now. What once felt unfamiliar has become ordinary, yet history often changes most deeply through ordinary days, repeated with extraordinary determination. The river carries the expedition forward once again. Its muddy water glides beneath the hulls while broad cottonwood forests gradually give way to larger stretches of open prairie. Every mile travelled now makes the eastern settlements feel increasingly distant. You begin noticing another quiet transformation. The frontier is no longer simply a destination. It is becoming an idea back in the eastern states. Letters and newspaper reports slowly spread news of western exploration. Merchants discuss new trade opportunities. Farmers wonder whether fertile land awaits beyond the Mississippi. Young families begin imagining futures that their parents could scarcely have considered. The West is entering people's imagination long before most will ever see it. Research discussed by historians at the University of Virginia has emphasized that reports from early exploration expeditions significantly influenced public understanding of the Louisiana Purchase by replacing uncertainty with increasingly reliable geographic knowledge. Although migration remained limited during these years, curiosity expanded rapidly throughout the young republic. Historians continue debating exactly how quickly ordinary Americans embraced Western expansion after 1803. Some scholars argue that economic opportunity immediately captured public attention. Others suggest that many families remained cautious for years because distance, uncertainty, and difficult travel discouraged rapid movement. The surviving evidence reflects both hope and hesitation. The boats continue upstream beneath brilliant blue skies. The crew works with practiced confidence. Long poles press against the riverbed, while sturdy oars keep the vessels aligned with the strongest channels. No movement is wasted. Every action feels deliberate. You notice Lewis pausing to study another unfamiliar plant growing beside a narrow creek. The delicate blossoms appear almost fragile against the broad prairie beyond. He kneels carefully, recording details before collecting a specimen with remarkable patience. Curiosity never tires. That quiet persistence has become one of the expedition's greatest strengths. Nearby, Clark studies the surrounding valley from the bow of the lead boat. His eyes move constantly between the river, the shoreline, and the distant horizon. Every change in elevation, every tributary, and every distinctive bluff may eventually guide someone else through these same landscapes. Maps grow slowly. Trust grows the same way. As midday approaches, the expedition encounters evidence that others have recently passed along this stretch of river. Fresh campfire ashes remain beneath a stand of cottonwoods. Nearby, several poles once supporting temporary shelters still stand firmly in the ground. No people remain, only traces. The camp reminds you that countless journeys have crossed this continent long before American exploration. Traders, hunters, families, diplomats, and indigenous travelers have all followed rivers because rivers naturally connect people across immense distances. The frontier remembers them quietly. Modern historians associated with the University of New Mexico have often emphasized that many routes later used by American explorers followed pathways already familiar to indigenous communities and regional traders. Exploration frequently expanded existing networks rather than creating entirely new ones. The afternoon grows pleasantly warm. A gentle breeze keeps insects away while clouds drift lazily across the immense sky. The expedition pauses beside a broad meadow where horses can graze safely for a short while. Lunch is prepared beneath scattered trees. Fresh fish cooks over a modest fire. Wild onions gathered nearby add welcome flavour. The simple meal feels deeply satisfying after another morning of steady labour. While eating, several members of the crew begin discussing what may happen after the expedition eventually returns east. One imagines bustling river ports. Another predicts new trading settlements. A third quietly wonders whether families will someday travel these rivers with wagons instead of military boats. The conversation fades naturally. No one claims certainty. The future still belongs to imagination. You find yourself reflecting on how remarkably young the United States remains during these years. The nation is still learning its own shape. Every successful expedition adds another piece to a much larger understanding of what America may eventually become. That realization carries both excitement and responsibility. Expansion brings opportunity. It also brings lasting consequences. Historians frequently remind readers that every new settlement established in later decades would reshape existing communities and landscapes in profound ways. During these early years, however, those outcomes still lie mostly beyond the horizon, waiting for future generations. The afternoon journey resumes beneath increasingly open skies. The prairie now stretches so far that distant hills appear almost suspended above the earth. Wind moves continuously through tall grasses, creating broad waves that shimmer beneath the sunlight. The view feels endless. It also feels peaceful. Lewis quietly pauses to observe another unfamiliar bird circling above a nearby marsh. Its graceful flight receives another careful journal entry before the expedition continues. Nothing escapes attention. Not because everything is dramatic, because everything contributes to understanding. Research highlighted by historians at the University of Wisconsin has noted that the remarkable consistency of the expedition's observations helped create an unusually complete picture of Western environments during the early 19th century. The value of the journals lies as much in their steady discipline as in their most famous discoveries. Toward evening, the boats reach a gently sloping bank overlooking a wide bend in the Missouri. The location offers fresh water, abundant firewood, and good visibility in every direction. It feels like an ideal campsite. Routine begins immediately. Boats are secured. Cooking fires are lit. Wet clothing is hung where the evening breeze will dry it before morning. Several men quietly repair worn moccasins while others organize supplies for another day of travel. The camp now operates almost effortlessly. Shared experience has replaced uncertainty. Dinner consists of roasted fish, cornmeal, and a handful of berries gathered along the shoreline. The warm aroma drifts across the camp while the setting sun paints the river with deep shades of amber and crimson. Conversation remains thoughtful tonight. Someone wonders how these valleys will appear 50 years from now. Another smiles quietly before replying that perhaps someone will ask the same question another 50 years after that. History keeps moving. So do rivers. Darkness settles gently over the frontier. Fireflies appear among the grasses while frogs begin their evening chorus from nearby wetlands. Above, the stars emerge with astonishing brightness across the cloudless sky. You sit beside the fading fire. Warm embers glow softly. The cool night breeze brushes across your face. The Missouri continues its endless journey through the darkness, flowing just as it did long before the expedition arrived and just as it will long after it has passed. You realize that these early years between 1803 and 1806 are quietly planting the first seeds of a much larger frontier story. The discoveries made today will encourage future travellers. The maps drawn tonight will guide future journeys. The journals carefully protected beside the fire will help future generations understand a continent that is only beginning to reveal itself. The West is still young in the American imagination, yet with every patient mile, it grows a little clearer. Your thoughts continue flowing with the broad Missouri as another calm morning settles across the frontier. The eastern horizon brightens slowly, revealing long ribbons of mist drifting above the water before the sunlight gently dissolves them. The cool air carries the familiar scent of damp earth, river mud, and fresh cottonwood leaves stirred by a light breeze. The camp awakens without urgency. Someone quietly rekindles the morning fire. Coffee begins to steam. A kettle lid rattles softly. The simple sounds now feel as comforting as old friends. You realize that the expedition has travelled far enough for the frontier to begin changing not only the landscape around you, but also the people within the boats. Every difficult day has quietly shaped their habits, their patience, and even the way they think. Hardship has become a patient teacher. It rarely raises its voice. The boats return to the river soon after breakfast. Their steady progress upstream has become almost instinctive. Long poles press into the muddy riverbed while oars move with practiced precision. Nobody wastes energy. Every motion serves a purpose. The Missouri still refuses to make the journey easy, yet it no longer feels like an enemy. Instead, it resembles a demanding companion whose moods must be respected rather than defeated. That lesson reaches beyond the river. The frontier itself rewards flexibility far more often than stubbornness. Research discussed by historians at Stanford University has emphasized that adaptability became one of the defining characteristics of successful Western expeditions. Leaders who adjusted plans according to changing weather, geography, and local knowledge generally achieved better outcomes than those who relied upon rigid expectations. Historians continue debating whether adaptability or preparation contributed more significantly to the expedition's remarkable success. Some scholars emphasize meticulous planning before departure. Others argue that careful preparation mattered only because the leaders remained willing to change their decisions whenever conditions required. Perhaps the greatest strength lies in combining both. Late in the morning, the expedition enters an increasingly open landscape where forests become scattered islands surrounded by vast stretches of prairie. The change feels gradual rather than sudden. Individual trees stand farther apart. Tall grasses spread across rolling hills that seem to continue forever. The horizon grows wider, so does your imagination. Wind moves continuously through the prairie, creating broad waves across the grass that resemble the surface of a quiet sea. The sound is soft, almost like whispered conversation carried across countless miles. You pause to listen. The prairie has its own language. Lewis notices fresh signs of wildlife throughout the open country. Antelope appear briefly upon a distant ridge before disappearing with astonishing speed. Meadowlarks perch atop waving grasses, filling the warm air with cheerful songs. Everything feels wonderfully alive. The expedition continues recording these observations with remarkable discipline. Every unfamiliar species receives careful attention. Every changing landscape becomes another valuable journal entry. Knowledge accumulates quietly. It never announces itself. Modern historians associated with the University of Minnesota have noted that the expedition's descriptions of prairie ecosystems became especially valuable because relatively few written scientific accounts of these environments existed at the beginning of the 19th century. By midday, the boats pause beside a broad meadow where a clear stream joins the Missouri. The fresh water sparkles brightly beneath the summer sun, while dragonflies dart effortlessly above its surface. Lunch is prepared beneath scattered cottonwoods. The crew eats fresh fish alongside dried corn and coarse bread. Someone quietly passes around wild plums gathered during the morning. The sweet fruit provides a welcome change from preserved provisions. Conversation soon turns toward the future. One man wonders whether large towns will someday stand beside these quiet rivers. Another imagines farms stretching across the endless prairie. A third simply shakes his head in quiet amazement at the sheer size of the country surrounding them. No one fully understands what lies ahead. The future remains hidden beyond the horizon. You begin reflecting upon how exploration changes imagination before it changes geography. Long before settlers build cabins or merchants establish trading posts, explorers reshape the way people think about distant places. A map changes possibilities. A journal changes understanding. Together they change history. Research highlighted by historians at Princeton University has emphasized that the expedition helped replace vague speculation about the American West with increasingly reliable information, encouraging government officials, scientists, and ordinary citizens to view the region through evidence rather than rumor alone. As the afternoon continues, clouds gather briefly before drifting away without rain. Their moving shadows cross the broad prairie in slow waves of changing light. The scenery never remains exactly the same. Every hour brings subtle differences. The boats pass towering bluffs where exposed layers of rock reveal countless years of geological history. Lewis studies the formations with quiet fascination, recognizing that even the cliffs themselves hold stories extending far beyond human memory. Nature measures time differently. Mountains do not hurry, rivers do not worry, only people feel rushed. The expedition gradually learns another rhythm. Toward late afternoon, the travelers encounter a broad herd of bison grazing peacefully across the distant prairie. This time the animals remain visible long enough for everyone to admire them properly. Hundreds move together, perhaps more. The herd stretches across the grass like a slow-moving shadow beneath the bright sky. Nobody speaks for several moments. The sight feels almost sacred. Lewis carefully records their behavior while Clark estimates the size of the herd as accurately as possible. The journals preserve not only scientific observations, but also quiet moments of wonder that words can barely capture. Historians frequently point to these descriptions as invaluable records of wildlife populations before the dramatic environmental changes that unfolded during the following century. The afternoon slowly gives way to evening. Golden light spreads across the prairie. The wind becomes gentler. Long shadows stretch toward the river. Camp is established upon a low bluff overlooking a broad bend where the Missouri flows peacefully beneath the setting sun. The familiar routine begins once more. Boats are secured, firewood is gathered, fishing lines are cast into calm water. Several fresh fish soon cook above glowing coals while the comforting smell of wood smoke fills the cooling evening air. Lewis spends extra time organizing recent journal entries. Clark carefully reviews another completed section of his growing map. Their work never truly ends. Neither does their curiosity. Darkness gradually settles across the valley. Fireflies drift lazily among the grasses while countless stars brighten overhead. Coyotes call somewhere across the distant prairie, their voices rising gently through the cool night air. You sit quietly beside the fading fire. Its warmth reaches your hands. The smell of smoke clings gently to your clothing. The vast frontier stretches silently in every direction. You realize that the greatest transformation taking place is not simply upon the maps carried by the expedition. It is happening within the minds of everyone involved. The unknown is slowly becoming familiar. Fear is gradually giving way to understanding. Curiosity continues replacing uncertainty. The American frontier is beginning to form an identity of its own, built not upon myths or distant rumors, but upon patient observation, quiet endurance, and the steady courage to keep moving toward horizons that reveal themselves only one peaceful day at a time. Your thoughts drift onward beneath another immense western sky as the quiet murmur of the Missouri greets a new morning. The first light spreads gently across the river, turning its broad muddy surface into flowing ribbons of bronze. A cool breeze carries the scent of damp willow branches, fresh prairie grass, and the lingering smoke from last night's campfire. The frontier wakes slowly. So do you, one by one. Familiar sounds return to the camp. Someone stirs glowing embers back into flame. Tin cups gently touch one another as coffee is poured. Boots press into soft earth, while blankets disappear into carefully packed bundles. Every movement feels practiced. Every routine feels earned. Months ago, these simple tasks demanded constant attention. Now they unfold almost effortlessly, as though the wilderness itself has quietly taught everyone how to live within it. The boats soon return to the river. Their steady rhythm continues. Push, lift, pull, breathe. The movements seem almost timeless. You notice that conversation this morning turns toward the expedition itself rather than the landscape. Several of the younger men quietly reflect upon how much they have changed since leaving the eastern settlements. One smiles while remembering how enormous the Mississippi once seemed. Now even the Missouri has become familiar. Another laughs softly, recalling how difficult the first days of rowing had felt. His hands, once tender, are now rough and hardened by months of honest work. The frontier leaves its mark, not through dramatic moments alone. Through repetition, research discussed by historians at the University of North Carolina has emphasized that prolonged expeditions often transformed participants psychologically as much as physically. Daily routines, shared hardship, and constant adaptation gradually reshaped confidence, decision-making, and relationships among the crew. Historians continue debating how consciously members of the Corps of Discovery recognized these personal changes while the journey was still unfolding. Some scholars suggest that only later journal entries reveal deeper reflection. Others believe the gradual transformation became apparent even during the expedition itself, through changing attitudes and increasingly confident leadership. Either way, change rarely announces itself. It simply accumulates. The Missouri bends gently toward the northwest as broad stretches of prairie replace much of the woodland that once bordered the river. The landscape feels increasingly open. The sky appears even larger. Wind moves constantly through tall grasses. Clouds drift without hurry. You begin understanding why later generations would forever associate the American frontier with endless horizons. The land invites thought. There are few walls here. Very little interrupts your view except distant hills that seem to float above the earth. Silence grows larger. It never feels empty. Lewis continues collecting specimens whenever opportunities arise. Today he pauses beside an unusual cluster of flowering shrubs growing along a sandy bank. He carefully examines leaves, flowers, and stems before preserving another sample between sheets of paper. Every discovery receives equal respect. Common or rare, large or small, scientific discipline never depends upon excitement. Modern historians associated with the University of California have frequently observed that the expedition's careful attention to seemingly ordinary plants proved invaluable, because many species later became important subjects of botanical research throughout the 19th century. By late morning, the expedition reaches an unusually broad section of river where the current slows noticeably. The calmer water reflects enormous clouds moving gracefully overhead. For a few precious hours, rowing becomes easier. The crew almost welcomes the change with quiet smiles. No one mistakes calm water for permanent comfort. Experience has removed such illusions. The frontier always changes. Lunch is taken upon a grassy bank overlooking the river. Fresh venison from a recent hunt roasts slowly above glowing coals, while wild onions and prairie herbs add rich aroma to the simple meal. The smell feels wonderfully comforting. Nearby, Clark studies his maps once again. The pages now contain far fewer blank spaces than when the expedition first departed. Each completed line represents effort. Each effort represents time. You imagine future travelers unfolding copies of these maps years from now. Many will never know the exhaustion required to draw them. They will simply follow rivers and landmarks with confidence built upon someone else's careful labour. That quiet inheritance feels meaningful. Research highlighted by historians at the University of Missouri has emphasized that Clark's cartographic work influenced Western travel for many years after the expedition, providing some of the most reliable geographic information available during the early decades of American expansion. The afternoon brings another encounter with travelers moving through the region. This time they are experienced traders guiding several pack horses loaded with valuable furs gathered during the previous season. Their clothing shows years of hard travel. Their expressions reveal calm confidence. These men know the frontier intimately. Greetings are exchanged warmly. Information follows naturally. The traders describe changing conditions farther upstream. They mention stretches of difficult navigation, promising hunting grounds. and villages where friendly relations continue strengthening established trade. Lewis listens carefully. Clark quietly asks practical questions regarding river channels and nearby tributaries. Useful knowledge always deserves attention. Historians frequently remind us that successful exploration relied upon countless informal conversations like these. Official reports mattered greatly, but practical advice shared beside rivers and campfires often proved equally valuable. The afternoon gradually softens toward evening. Sunlight turns warmer as long shadows stretch across the prairie. A gentle breeze carries the earthy scent of drying grass mixed with distant wild sage. The boats continue steadily onward. Nobody seems eager to hurry. The journey itself has become part of home. Camp is established upon a broad rise overlooking both prairie and river. The location offers a magnificent view of the surrounding country. Miles of open grass, scattered groves of cottonwood, the winding Missouri disappearing into the western distance. The scene feels almost endless. Dinner cooks slowly, while several members of the expedition quietly repair equipment worn by months of constant use. A paddle receives fresh bindings, leather straps are reinforced, boot soles are stitched carefully. Lewis organizes botanical specimens. Clark reviews another day's mapping. The familiar routines continue without discussion. They have become second nature. Darkness gradually settles across the valley. The prairie cools quickly after sunset. Crickets begin their evening chorus while countless stars emerge above the clear western sky with astonishing brilliance. You sit beside the fading fire, warm embers glow softly. The smell of wood smoke settles into your clothes once again. Beyond the camp, the vast frontier rests peacefully beneath the stars. You begin realizing that the expedition has accomplished something larger than simply traveling west. It has created a new understanding of distance, patience, cooperation, and discovery. Every mile has quietly transformed both the explorers and the nation waiting for their return. The frontier remains immense. Much still lies ahead. Yet tonight, beneath this endless sky, you understand that the story of the American West is no longer being imagined from distant cities. It is being carefully written beside flowing rivers, beneath open stars, and within the steady hearts of those patient enough to keep following the horizon. Your thoughts continue drifting westward as another quiet dawn settles gently over the Missouri River. The eastern sky glows with soft shades of amber while a cool mist rises from the broad water before fading into the clear morning air. A gentle breeze stirs the tall prairie grass, carrying with it the clean scent of damp earth, wild sage, and fresh cottonwood leaves. The morning feels wonderfully calm. The frontier seems almost at peace. The camp awakens as it has countless times before. Someone quietly feeds dry branches into the fire until bright flames return. Another fills a kettle with cool river water, while several others prepare the boats for another day's steady journey. Every movement feels familiar. Every movement feels purposeful. The expedition has travelled far enough that the routines no longer require conscious thought. Experience guides every action. You begin reflecting upon everything that has quietly accumulated since the expedition first departed. The journals have grown thick with observations. Maps have expanded across pages that once held only blank space. Plant specimens carefully pressed between paper now represent an entirely new understanding of Western landscapes. Knowledge has weight, even when carried inside notebooks. The boats move steadily into the current beneath another cloudless summer sky. The Missouri continues winding through an increasingly open landscape, where broad prairies stretch toward distant horizons. The scenery feels both familiar and endlessly new. Every bend reveals another possibility. Every mile offers another lesson. Research discussed by historians at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology has emphasized that systematic observation during long expeditions often created lasting scientific value beyond the original goals of exploration. Carefully gathered geographic and environmental information frequently became useful in ways the original observers could never have fully anticipated. Historians continue debating whether Jefferson himself fully appreciated the long-term scientific importance of the expedition before it departed. Some scholars believe his broad intellectual interests suggest remarkable foresight. Others argue that the full significance only became apparent after the journals and collections returned east. History often grows larger with time. The morning progresses peacefully, meadowlarks continue singing from scattered patches of prairie while hawks circle high above the valley, searching patiently for movement below. Lewis pauses repeatedly to record changes in vegetation. Certain grasses now dominate the landscape. New flowering plants appear beside shallow streams. Shrubs adapted to drier conditions become increasingly common. The frontier changes gradually. Its lessons reward careful attention. Clark remains equally occupied with his maps. Every tributary receives another careful measurement. Every recognizable bluff becomes another dependable landmark. You notice how often he compares today's observations with notes made weeks earlier. Accuracy demands patience. Patience demands humility. No one expects perfection from the first observation. Modern historians associated with the University of Wisconsin have frequently pointed to Clark's willingness to revise earlier map details as evidence of careful scientific discipline rather than uncertainty. Improving knowledge often requires correcting previous assumptions. By midday, the expedition reaches a broad overlook where the Missouri curves gracefully through rolling prairie. The view invites everyone to pause. Lunch is prepared beneath a stand of sturdy cottonwoods. Fresh fish cooks over glowing coals. The smell of roasted meat mixes with the fragrance of warm grass carried by the afternoon breeze. Several members of the crew quietly rest beneath the shade while Lewis reviews recent journal entries. Conversation turns naturally toward home once again. One man wonders whether Eastern readers will believe descriptions of these enormous prairies. Another quietly replies that perhaps future generations will simply accept such landscapes as ordinary parts of their country. The thought lingers. You realize that the frontier itself is gradually becoming less mysterious. Not because it has changed, but because understanding has changed. Maps reduce uncertainty. Knowledge reduces fear. Curiosity continues replacing imagination. Research highlighted by historians at Yale University has emphasized that accurate geographic information often transformed public attitudes toward distant regions by replacing exaggerated rumors with reliable descriptions. Exploration encouraged confidence precisely because it made unfamiliar places more understandable. The afternoon continues beneath warm sunshine. Gentle winds ripple endlessly across the prairie while the Missouri flows steadily beside the travelers. Wildlife remains abundant. A large herd of deer grazes peacefully near the river before quietly disappearing into scattered woodland. Beaver lodges appear along sheltered banks where calm water allows careful construction. Everything seems balanced. The frontier supports remarkable diversity. Lewis carefully observes the beaver structures before making another journal entry. Their engineering fascinates him. Small streams diverted by carefully arranged branches create peaceful ponds where countless other species also thrive. Nature quietly shapes itself. Human beings are not the only builders here. Historians continue discussing how the expedition's detailed wildlife observations later contributed to American natural science. Some scholars emphasize specific discoveries, while others highlight the remarkable consistency with which everyday observations were recorded over many months. The value lies in persistence. Late in the afternoon, dark clouds briefly gather along the distant horizon before slowly drifting north without reaching the expedition. The changing light paints broad shadows across the rolling prairie. The scenery becomes almost dreamlike. Golden sunlight, blue distance, green grass, silver river. The colors seem impossible to forget. As evening approaches, the expedition establishes camp upon another gently rising bluff overlooking the Missouri. The location offers fresh water, open visibility, and enough dry wood for another comfortable fire. Routine unfolds effortlessly. Boats are secured, supplies are organized, fishing lines are cast. The crew now performs these tasks almost without discussion. Shared experience has become silent communication. Dinner is unusually satisfying. Fresh fish, roasted over oak coals, is served with dried corn and wild herbs gathered nearby. Laughter occasionally drifts through the camp as tired companions exchange stories from earlier days of the journey. The mood feels quietly hopeful, not because the expedition is finished, because it has endured. Lewis spends the final daylight organizing his growing collection of notes and specimens. Clark carefully rolls another completed map before protecting it inside waterproof coverings. The work of today will belong to tomorrow. The work of tomorrow will belong to history. Darkness settles gently across the frontier. Fireflies flicker among the grasses while stars gradually fill the sky above the quiet valley. The Missouri continues flowing steadily through the night, carrying reflections of countless constellations toward distant places still waiting beyond the horizon. You sit beside the glowing fire, warmth reaches your hands, the cool evening breeze brushes gently across your face. Everything feels wonderfully still. You understand that the expedition now carries something far greater than supplies alone. It carries a clearer understanding of an entire region, patiently gathered through honesty, discipline, curiosity, and quiet endurance. The American frontier remains vast. Many mysteries still lie ahead, yet the unknown has become smaller with every careful observation, every thoughtful journal entry, and every mile earned through steady determination. Tomorrow, the journey will continue. Tonight, the frontier rests peacefully beneath the endless western stars. Your thoughts continue gently toward the western horizon as another quiet morning settles over the Missouri River. The first light of dawn spreads across the broad valley with remarkable softness. Mist rises from the water in delicate ribbons before disappearing into the warming air. A meadowlark sings somewhere beyond the camp while the steady current continues its endless journey toward distant lands. The morning feels familiar, yet something has changed. Not the river, not the prairie. You. The expedition wakes with the same dependable rhythm that has carried it through countless days. Coffee warms chilled hands. Blankets are folded with practiced care. Boats are inspected before another departure. The routines remain unchanged. Yet every traveller now performs them with a quiet confidence that did not exist when the journey first began. Experience has become instinct. The frontier has become teacher. You pause beside the river before stepping into the boat once more. The Missouri flows steadily past, completely indifferent to human hopes or ambitions. It flowed long before governments discussed treaties. It flowed before maps carried names. It flowed through generations of indigenous communities whose knowledge shaped these valleys over centuries. It will continue flowing long after this expedition becomes history. That realization brings a surprising sense of peace. Research discussed by historians at Harvard University has emphasized that the years between 1803 and 1806 marked a decisive turning point in the early history of the United States, because exploration transformed the Louisiana Purchase from an abstract political agreement into a landscape that could be described, studied, and gradually understood. Historians still debate whether these formative years should be viewed primarily as the beginning of national expansion or as the beginning of a broader scientific understanding of Western North America. Many scholars now suggest that both developments unfolded together, each influencing the other throughout the early 19th century. History rarely follows only one path. The boats continue upstream beneath another magnificent summer sky. The prairie stretches endlessly on both sides of the river, its grasses bending gently beneath the morning wind. Distant hills shimmer beneath warm sunlight while broad clouds drift lazily overhead. Everything feels wonderfully open. The landscape no longer seems mysterious in quite the same way. It remains immense, but it has become familiar through patient observation. You think back to the first days after the Louisiana Purchase, when blank spaces dominated nearly every map of the region. Rumours often outweighed reliable knowledge. Rivers disappeared into uncertainty. Mountains existed only in scattered reports passed from traveller to traveller. Now those blank spaces have begun to shrink. Not completely, but meaningfully. Every careful journal entry has added another piece to the larger picture. Every measured distance has improved another map. Every respectful conversation has expanded understanding beyond geography alone. The frontier has revealed itself gradually because the expedition approached it with patience rather than haste. Modern historians associated with Yale University have often observed that the lasting success of the Corps of Discovery rested not upon dramatic moments, but upon extraordinary consistency, day after day. The expedition continued recording observations with remarkable discipline. creating one of the richest collections of first-hand information from early 19th century North America. The morning passes quietly. Wildlife continues moving according to ancient rhythms that remain completely unaffected by political events far away. A bald eagle glides effortlessly above the river. A beaver disappears beneath calm water. Bison graze peacefully upon distant prairie. The natural world continues exactly as it always has. You realize that exploration has never meant discovering a world that did not exist. It has meant learning to understand a world that already did. That distinction feels important. As midday approaches, the expedition pauses one final time beside a gently flowing stream entering the Missouri. Lunch is simple as always. Fresh fish cooks above glowing coals while warm bread rests upon clean cloth spread across the grass. No celebration takes place. There is no need. The quiet satisfaction shared among the travellers speaks more clearly than speeches ever could. The afternoon journey resumes beneath brilliant blue skies. Lewis continues writing, Clark continues mapping. The crew continues rowing. Nothing dramatic happens. That itself feels meaningful. History is often remembered through extraordinary moments, yet it is truly built through ordinary days repeated faithfully over time. The American frontier has begun not through a single event but through countless careful choices. A map revised, a specimen collected, a friendship formed, a river measured, a lesson learned. Late in the afternoon, the expedition reaches a broad bluff overlooking one of the most beautiful stretches of the Missouri yet encountered. The boats are secured while everyone climbs slowly toward the summit. From above, the view feels almost beyond description. The river winds gracefully through forests and prairie before disappearing into distant blue horizons. Sunlight dances upon the water. Tall grasses ripple continuously beneath the wind. The sky seems almost endless. You stand quietly. There is nothing to improve, nothing to hurry, only gratitude. You understand that these years between 1803 and 1806 do not complete the history of the American frontier. They begin it. Soon traders will follow, then settlers, then roads, then towns, then railroads. Generations yet unborn will inherit maps first drawn during these early journeys. They will travel routes first described in these journals. They will see landscapes whose earliest careful descriptions were written beside campfires exactly like the one waiting below. Evening slowly arrives. The expedition establishes one more peaceful campsite beside the river. Firewood crackles gently as supper cooks above glowing coals. The familiar smell of wood smoke drifts into the cool evening air while stars gradually appear across the darkening sky. Lewis carefully closes another journal. Clark gently rolls another completed map. The day's work is finished. The larger work has only begun. You sit quietly beside the fading fire, listening to the steady whisper of the Missouri flowing through the darkness. The cool night breeze brushes gently across your face while countless stars shine overhead with calm, timeless certainty. The frontier no longer feels like an empty mystery. It feels like a living world connected by rivers, people, knowledge, patience, and quiet perseverance. As your thoughts slowly settle into the peaceful rhythm of flowing water and distant night sounds, you realize that the greatest discoveries are not always distant mountains or unfamiliar rivers. Sometimes the greatest discovery is learning to see the world with greater curiosity, greater humility, and greater respect than before. The American frontier has begun. Its story will continue for generations. But tonight, beneath these endless western stars, the river simply keeps flowing, patient as ever, inviting you to rest while history carries on beyond the horizon. Thank you for sharing this quiet journey through the opening years of the American frontier. If one moment stayed with you most, whether it was the endless Missouri River, the peaceful prairie, the careful map-making, or the remarkable cooperation between different peoples, I would love to hear about it in the comments. Your favourite moment may be completely different from someone else's, and that is part of what makes history so meaningful. If you enjoyed travelling through these early years together, there are many more peaceful stories waiting on this channel, each exploring another chapter of the past with the same calm pace and thoughtful detail. Until our next journey, may your evening be restful, your dreams be peaceful, and your curiosity continue leading you toward the remarkable stories that history still has to share.